Story 1. I woke up to the sound of glass shattering, the sharp crack echoing through the stillness of my apartment. It jolted me from a deep sleep, heart pounding as I lay frozen beneath the covers. Alone in my apartment, a sudden chill ran down my spine as I realized someone was inside. The moonlight filtered through the curtains, casting eerie shadows across the room. My mind raced, trying to piece together what was happening. I strained to listen, holding my breath, the silence now thick and oppressive, every creak of the building amplifying my anxiety. After a few tense moments, I swung my legs over the side of the bed, feet landing softly on the cool floor. The living room lay just beyond the door, and I felt an overwhelming urge to check it out, but fear rooted me in place. I could still hear faint rustling sounds mixed with the distant hum of the city, a reminder that life continued outside these walls, unaware of my plight. Gathering my courage, I tiptoed toward the door, each step feeling like a test of my resolve. I paused just outside, pressing my ear against the cold wood, desperate for any indication of what lay beyond. The rustling grew louder, accompanied by muffled thuds, sending my heart racing again as I pictured an intruder rummaging through my belongings. In that moment, I realized I had to act. Grabbing my phone from the bedside table, I slipped it into my pocket, trying to remain silent. I glanced around the room, searching for anything that could serve as a weapon, my mind flicking through possibilities. My lamp, a heavy book, even a candle holder. With my heart in my throat, I slowly opened the door a crack, peering into the darkened living room. The moonlight illuminated the chaos, scattered papers, a toppled chair, and the remnants of the shattered glass. I felt a surge of adrenaline. I wasn't just a passive observer anymore. I was in a fight for my safety. Suddenly, I heard a loud crash from the kitchen, causing my stomach to drop. The noise was unmistakable, a heavy object hitting the floor. My instinct screamed for me to run, to hide, but something deep inside urged me to confront the situation. I could feel the adrenaline coursing through my veins, heightening my senses and sharpening my focus. I crept back to the living room, the shadows playing tricks on my mind as I strained to see through the darkness. The faint glow from the streetlights outside flickered on the walls, creating fleeting glimpses of movement. I took a deep breath, willing myself to remain calm, and decided to move toward the kitchen where the sounds had originated. As I reached the threshold of the kitchen, the sight before me sent chills down my spine. The door lay ajar, and the light from the refrigerator spilled across the floor, illuminating a figure hunched over my cabinets. My heart raced, and for a moment I was frozen in disbelief. There it was, a stranger rifling through my belongings as if they belonged to him. Summoning every ounce of courage, I took a step forward, my voice trembling as I called out, "Who are you? What do you want?" The intruder froze, his head snapping up as he turned to face me. His eyes widened in surprise, and for a split second, time stood still between us. The silence was deafening, a standoff between fear and desperation. The intruder's gaze flickered around the room, calculating his next move, while I felt an urgent need to regain control of the situation. I lifted the lamp I had grabbed earlier, holding it like a shield, my grip tightening around the base as I prepared for whatever might come next. "Stay back," I shouted, my voice stronger than I felt. The intruder took a step toward me, a predatory gleam in his eyes, and I could see the uncertainty flicker across his face. It was clear he hadn't expected to be confronted, and in that moment, I realized I might have a chance. Desperation fueled my next move. I lunged toward the kitchen counter, searching for anything I could use to defend myself. My fingers brushed against a knife block, and I seized the largest knife, its weight reassuring in my hand. With the blade glinting in the dim light, I felt a rush of power coursing through me. "Get out!" I yelled again, more forcefully this time. The intruder hesitated, and I could see him weighing his options. For a brief moment, he seemed to consider fleeing, but then his bravado returned, and he took another step forward. My heart raced as I realized I had to be ready for anything. Suddenly, he lunged at me, and I instinctively swung the knife in front of me. The blade caught the light as he sidestepped, and I could feel the adrenaline surging through me. The fight or flight response had kicked in fully, and in that chaotic moment, I knew I would not let fear dictate my actions. As the struggle continued, my mind raced through the options, a whirlwind of instinct and strategy. I had to find a way to escape or incapacitate him. In a desperate bid for control, I yelled for help, knowing it could draw attention from neighbors. The sound echoed through the apartment, merging with the adrenaline coursing through my veins. The intruder paused again, his eyes darting toward the window, as if weighing whether to make a break for it. Seizing the moment, I took a step back, preparing for the next move. I felt a surge of empowerment mixed with fear, my heart pounding fiercely in my chest. I was fighting for my home, my safety, and for the first time I realized I had the upper hand. In that charged atmosphere, I saw my chance. With a swift motion, I pivoted and dashed for the door, throwing it open wide. My voice rang out, filled with urgency as I yelled for help again. The commotion had drawn attention, and I could hear footsteps approaching from the hallway. The intruder hesitated, caught off guard by the sudden change in the situation. He glanced back toward me, and for a fleeting moment, I saw uncertainty flicker in his eyes. Then, without another word, he turned and bolted toward the back exit, slipping through the door and out of sight. As the footsteps in the hallway grew louder, I felt a wave of relief wash over me, mixed with the remnants of adrenaline still coursing through my veins. I sank against the wall, the knife trembling in my hand, and let out a shaky breath. I was safe for now, but the reality of the night loomed heavy in the air, a reminder of how quickly everything could change. Story 2. For months, my routine had been tainted by a creeping sense of unease. It started innocently enough, small notes left under my windshield wiper, cryptic messages that made me question whether they were harmless pranks or something more sinister. At first, I brushed them off, thinking they were the work of an overly enthusiastic admirer, or perhaps a misguided friend. But as the weeks passed, the notes grew increasingly unsettling, filled with intimate details about my life that only someone close to me would know. Each morning, I would approach my car with trepidation, scanning the area for any sign of movement. The notes, written in a careful but scrawled hand, made references to my daily habits, my favorite coffee shop, and even the book one was reading at the time. It felt as if someone had taken a deep dive into my life, watching from the shadows while I remained blissfully unaware. Anxiety began to seep into my thoughts, spiraling my once peaceful days into a state of hypervigilance. One dreary Tuesday, I parked my car in the usual lot outside my office, heart pounding as I wondered if today would be the day I'd confront my stalker. As I entered the building, the sense of dread clung to me like a heavy fog. I tried to focus on my work, but the notes haunted me, echoing in my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that someone was lurking just beyond my line of sight, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. That afternoon, the sunlight dwindled, casting long shadows across the pavement. I stepped outside for a brief break, inhaling the crisp air and attempting to clear my mind. As I leaned against a wall, glancing around the parking lot, I caught a glimpse of movement near the far end. My heart raced as I squinted into the fading light, desperate to make sense of what I was seeing. There, half hidden behind a tree, stood a figure shrouded in darkness, their features obscured by the twilight. Panic surged through me, and I instinctively pressed my back against the cool brick wall, hoping to remain invisible. The figure shifted slightly, and I caught a glimpse of a familiar silhouette, the same shape that had haunted my thoughts for months. My stalker was real, and they were so much closer than I had ever imagined. The realization struck me like a punch to the gut, a jarring reminder that the notes weren't just harmless words, but a direct connection to someone who had invaded my life. Desperate to maintain my composure, I turned away, my mind racing with thoughts of escape. I made my way back inside, each step heavy with fear. My heart thudded in my chest, and I could feel the adrenaline coursing through my veins. I rushed to my desk, locking the door behind me, feeling as though I was in a prison of my own making. The notes and the figure outside became a relentless storm in my mind, a whirlpool of anxiety that threatened to consume me. Minutes stretched into hours as I worked in a daze, the ambient noise of the office fading into an echo. I kept glancing at the clock, each tick amplifying my sense of dread. What if the figure was still out there, waiting for me? What did they want? The questions piled up and I felt trapped between fear and the need for answers. My co-workers went about their day, oblivious to my turmoil, their laughter echoing like distant bells while I sat frozen in my chair. As dusk fell, I knew I had to confront my fears. I couldn't let this stalker dictate my life any longer. With steely determination, I gathered my belongings, steeling myself for the walk to my car. I left the safety of the office and stepped into the dimming light, the air thick with tension. Every shadow seemed to stretch and twist, taunting me as I made my way across the parking lot. When I reached my car, I felt a surge of adrenaline. I had to face whatever or whoever was lurking in the darkness. As I scanned the area, a flicker of movement caught my eye. There, behind the same tree, the figure emerged, stepping into the light. I could barely make out their face, but the glint in their eyes sent chills down my spine. It was as if they had been waiting for this moment, the air crackling with anticipation. Summoning every ounce of courage, I called out, my voice trembling but resolute. "Who are you? Why are you doing this?" The figure paused, the shadows concealing their expression, but I could sense the tension in the air. For a moment, silence enveloped us, a heavy blanket of uncertainty. Then, in a voice that sent shivers coursing through me, they spoke. Their words were filled with an unsettling familiarity, as if they had been rehearsed. "I just wanted to get your attention," they said, stepping closer. "You've been so distant, and I thought maybe if I showed you how much I care." The twisted logic of their reasoning made my stomach churn. This wasn't affection, it was obsession. I took a step back, my instincts screaming at me to run, to escape this nightmare that had unfolded right before my eyes. In that moment, I knew I had to take control. I pulled out my phone, my hands shaking as I dialed for help, ready to break the silence and bring an end to this terror. The figure recoiled slightly, as if realizing the danger they were in. But I was done being afraid. As the police dispatcher's voice came through the line, I felt a flicker of hope. I was no longer just a victim, I was reclaiming my power, ready to stand my ground against the darkness that had stalked me for too long. Story 3. I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. At first I thought it was just another telemarketer, a nuisance I'd learned to ignore. But when I picked up, the voice on the other end sent chills down my spine. It was familiar, yet eerily distorted, echoing with a sense of urgency that made my heart race. I strained to place the voice, my mind racing through the catalog of people I knew. It felt like a ghost from my past, lurking in the shadows of my memories. The voice called my name softly, almost a whisper, yet it resonated deeply within me. I felt an unsettling mix of fear and recognition, as if this voice had been waiting to reach out to me for years. "Do you remember me?" the voice asked, its tone both nostalgic and haunting. I could hear a hint of desperation woven into the words, as if it was fighting against something unseen. I hesitated, my thoughts spiraling into the depths of forgotten connections. It felt like a puzzle, pieces scattered in my mind, but the picture remained just out of reach. "It's been a long time," I managed to reply, my throat dry. I felt an urge to hang up, to disconnect from whatever this was, yet something kept me tethered to the call. There was an intimacy in the voice that pulled at my heart, stirring emotions I had buried long ago. I needed to understand what this was about, why this ghost from my past had reemerged. "I've missed you," the voice continued, and I felt a chill course through me. The sentiment was familiar, like a warm embrace, but it felt wrong. It was as if the warmth had turned to ice, the affection laced with an undercurrent of something darker. My mind raced, conjuring memories of friendships long faded, faces that had slipped away like sand through my fingers. "What do you want?" I finally asked, my voice barely above a whisper. There was a pause, an unsettling silence that felt heavy and suffocating. I could almost hear the heartbeat in my chest, echoing in the quiet, amplifying the tension between us. The caller took a deep breath, and when they spoke again, it was with a gravity that weighed down the air. "There's something I need to tell you," the voice said, each word deliberate and measured. I felt a mixture of dread and curiosity bubbling within me, urging me to stay on the line. I could sense the importance of what was about to unfold, a revelation lurking just beneath the surface. The connection between us, although strained, felt like an anchor to my past, and I couldn't let go. "Do you remember the last time we spoke?" they asked, and a flood of memories surged forth. I recalled a summer night, laughter shared under the stars, the warmth of friendship cloaking us like a soft blanket. But the memory quickly darkened, a shadow creeping in as I remembered the abrupt end, the silence that followed. "I never got to say goodbye," they continued, their voice trembling slightly. The weight of those words hung in the air, and I felt a swell of emotions crashing over me. Regret washed over me like a tide, and I realized how much I had pushed this person away. I didn't know how to reach out, I admitted, vulnerability slipping into my tone. The honesty between us felt like a fragile thread, but I couldn't ignore the gravity of the situation any longer. "Something happened after that night," the voice said, and I could hear the pain layered within the words. I leaned closer to the phone, captivated yet terrified. "I thought I lost you forever." The rawness in their voice pierced through the remnants of time, and I could almost feel the heartache radiating from the other end of the line. "Why are you calling me now?" I asked, my curiosity mingling with trepidation. The voice hesitated, and I could hear a faint rustling, as if they were gathering the strength to continue. "I've been searching for you," they said finally. "There's something important you need to know, something that could change everything." My breath caught in my throat, anticipation mingling with fear. The weight of the unknown hung between us, a thread of fate tying our lives together once more. "What is it?" I pressed, urgency now flooding my words. The darkness surrounding this call felt almost palpable, as if shadows were creeping into the corners of my mind. "It's about that night," they said, their voice trembling. I could sense the heaviness of their secret, an unspoken truth that hovered in the air. "You need to remember, to understand what really happened." The tension in my chest tightened as I braced myself for the revelation, the truth that had eluded me for so long. Just as they began to speak again, the call abruptly dropped. Silence enveloped me, the echo of their voice lingering like a haunting melody. I stared at my phone, bewildered, heart racing as I processed what had just transpired. The connection was severed, but the shadows of the past loomed larger than ever, leaving me in a haze of confusion and dread. Story 4. The sun hung high in the sky as I embarked on my solo hiking adventure, the promise of untouched nature calling to me. I had always found solace in the woods, the chirping of birds and rustling of leaves providing a symphony that soothed my restless mind. As I trekked deeper into the forest, the familiar trail gradually faded away, replaced by a maze of towering trees and tangled underbrush. I paused to catch my breath, realizing how quickly the scenery had changed. I must have taken a wrong turn somewhere along the way. The tranquility of the forest wrapped around me like a warm blanket, but as the minutes turned into hours, a sense of unease began to creep in. I glanced at my watch, noting that I had been hiking far longer than planned. The winding paths had led me deeper into the woods than I had intended, and with every step, the feeling of isolation grew heavier on my shoulders. I tried to shake off the discomfort, convincing myself that I was merely being paranoid. It was then that I first noticed the sound of subtle crunching of leaves, just beyond the thicket. I stopped, heart pounding, straining my ears to discern whether it was simply the wind or something else entirely. The silence of the woods seemed to stretch, amplifying the noise that had pricked my senses. After a moment of hesitation, I decided to press on, dismissing it as my imagination playing tricks on me. As I continued along the trail, the sense of being watched persisted, an invisible weight that made my skin crawl. The shadows of the trees felt darker, more foreboding, as if they were cloaking something sinister lurking just out of sight. I quickened my pace, glancing over my shoulder occasionally, half expecting to see a figure emerging from the underbrush. But the only movement I witnessed was the gentle sway of branches in the breeze. Minutes turned into what felt like an eternity as I navigated the dense foliage, anxiety gnawing at me. I stumbled upon a small clearing, momentarily relieved by the openness of the space. The sunlight filtered through the canopy, casting dappled patterns on the ground. I took a deep breath, attempting to steady my racing heart, when I heard it again, the unmistakable crunch of leaves behind me. I froze, every instinct urging me to turn around, yet fear held me in place. Determined to confront whatever was following me, I summoned my courage and spun around. The clearing was empty, but the hairs on my neck stood on end as I scanned the tree-line. The underbrush remained still, but the silence felt thick, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, the primal urge to flee clawing at my mind. With every passing moment, I could feel a deepening dread settling over me. I decided to head back, retracing my steps in hopes of finding the original trail. The woods, once beautiful and inviting, now felt like a labyrinth of shadows. I tried to calm myself, reasoning that I was simply lost and perhaps overreacting to the rustling I had heard earlier. Yet the unease lingered like a heavy fog. As I made my way through the trees, the sounds of the forest began to fade, replaced by an unsettling quiet. My mind raced with possibilities. What if I wasn't alone? What if someone had been watching me for a while? Every snap of a twig sent a jolt of fear through me, and I quickened my pace, desperate to escape whatever might be lurking just out of sight. Suddenly, I stumbled upon a narrow, overgrown path that seemed to beckon me. It looked less traveled than the other trails, but something in my gut urged me to take it. I stepped onto the path, hoping it would lead me back to safety. With each step, the feeling of being followed intensified. It felt like a dark cloud loomed just behind me, threatening to engulf me. The trees grew thicker, their gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. I couldn't shake the sensation of being pursued, as if I was being hunted. Panic surged within me, fueling my adrenaline as I pushed myself to move faster. I stole glances behind me, half expecting to see someone emerge from the shadows, yet each time, the path remained empty. Just when I thought I might find my way back to the main trail, I heard it again, the unmistakable crunching of leaves, louder and closer this time. My heart raced as I broke into a sprint, the sound of my own footsteps drowning out the noise behind me. I could feel the cold breath of fear on my neck, urging me to run faster, to escape the unseen presence that was so near. As I ran, the trees seemed to close in around me, their branches clawing at my arms and legs. I didn't know how long I could keep this pace. Exhaustion began to take hold, but the primal instinct to survive pushed me onward. My mind raced with thoughts of what I would do if I turned around and found someone there, or worse, if I stumbled and fell. Each breath felt labored, but I refused to stop. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I broke through the dense thicket and stumbled onto a more well-trodden path. The familiarity of it brought a wave of relief, but I didn't slow down. The crunching sound had ceased, but I was still acutely aware of the silence that enveloped me. I followed the path, praying it would lead me back to civilization. After a few more minutes of frantic running, I emerged from the woods, breathless and shaking. The sight of the parking lot filled me with a sense of safety, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been watching me all along. I glanced back at the tree-line, half expecting to see a figure emerge, but the woods remained silent, their secrets hidden within the shadows. I took a deep breath, grateful to be free from the grip of the forest, yet haunted by the realization that I had ventured too close to something I could never truly understand. Story 5. When I first moved into the quaint neighborhood, I felt an immediate sense of belonging. The houses lined the streets like a row of friendly sentinels, each one distinct yet harmonious with the others. My new neighbors, the Harrisons, were especially welcoming. They introduced themselves with warm smiles, inviting me over for coffee and sharing stories about the area. Everything seemed perfect. As the weeks passed, I grew accustomed to the routine of my new life. The sun would rise, casting golden light across the lawns, and I'd see the Harrisons in their yard, tending to their garden or playing with their children. Their laughter echoed in the air, blending with the chirping of birds. I often wondered what it would be like to have such a close-knit family. They seemed to radiate joy and warmth. However, one evening, everything changed. I was sitting on my porch, sipping tea and enjoying the cool breeze, when I noticed the Harrisons arguing loudly in their backyard. At first, I thought it was just a typical spat, but the intensity of their voices made my heart race. Curiosity got the better of me, and I found myself straining to hear what they were saying. The words that reached my ears were sharper than I had expected. "You can't keep hiding it," a voice shouted, filled with frustration. I recognized it as Lisa Harrison, the mother. Her husband, Mark, replied with a tone laced with desperation, "I'm trying to protect you and the kids. You don't understand." I felt a chill run down my spine, the warmth of the earlier evenings fading away. It was a fleeting moment, but it felt like a doorway had cracked open into a hidden world. I had never imagined that the seemingly perfect family next door could be harboring such turmoil. My mind raced with possibilities, each more troubling than the last. What secret were they hiding, and why was it so critical to keep it from their children? Days passed, and the argument replayed in my mind. I watched the Harrisons closely, looking for signs of the tension I had overheard. To the outside observer, they were still the same cheerful family. They attended community events, hosted barbecues, and smiled at the neighbors. But I could sense an undercurrent of anxiety whenever I saw them, particularly in Lisa's eyes. There was something more beneath the surface that no one seemed to acknowledge. Then, one rainy afternoon, I was walking my dog when I saw Lisa standing by the mailbox, her expression distant. I felt a pull of empathy, so I approached her, hoping to offer a friendly chat. We exchanged pleasantries, and for a moment it felt like our earlier connection. But as we spoke, I noticed her gaze flickering toward the house, her smile faltering. "I've been feeling a bit overwhelmed lately," she admitted, a hint of vulnerability breaking through her usually confident demeanor. I hesitated, considering whether to probe deeper or keep things light. "Is everything okay?" I asked, my voice gentle. For a heartbeat, I thought she might share her troubles with me, but she quickly masked her expression, flashing a practiced smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. As the days turned into weeks, the tension only seemed to grow. I could hear the hushed arguments late at night and see the way Mark and Lisa avoided eye contact in public. Their children, oblivious to the weight of their parents' burdens, played in the yard with an innocence that felt starkly contrasted against the shadows of adult worry. My heart ached for them. It was as if I were watching a tragedy unfold, powerless to intervene. One Saturday morning, I decided to confront my curiosity. I baked a batch of cookies, hoping to foster some sort of connection with Lisa. As I walked over, I rehearsed my words, wanting to offer support without prying too deeply. When Lisa opened the door, the surprise on her face was quickly replaced by her usual polite smile. "Thank you. That's so sweet of you," she said, accepting the plate. I stepped into the living room, the familiar scent of cinnamon and vanilla filling the air. But as we talked, I felt the distance between us grow. She mentioned how busy life had been, but the way her eyes darted away hinted that there was more to the story. Eventually, I took a leap of faith. "I overheard you and Mark the other night," I said carefully, gauging her reaction. Her face fell, a shadow passing over her features. "I'm sorry if I intruded," I added quickly, wanting to reassure her that I meant no harm. "But if you ever need someone to talk to, I'm here." For a moment, the silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken words. Lisa seemed to wrestle with her emotions, and I could see the internal struggle in her eyes. Just as I feared she would close off, she took a deep breath. "It's complicated," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "We're dealing with something from our past that keeps resurfacing." That admission hung in the air, a fragile thread connecting us. In that instant, I realized how deep their struggle ran, a battle between maintaining appearances and confronting the truth. Though I wanted to pry deeper, I could see that she wasn't ready to share more. Yet I felt honored that she had opened up even that little bit. The following weeks were a mix of uncertainty and tension in the neighborhood. I kept an eye on the Harrisons, hoping they would find their way back to the happiness I had initially seen. Each smile they offered felt a bit more strained, but I remained hopeful that they could confront whatever dark secret had taken root in their lives. Maybe, just maybe, with a little more time and understanding, they could find peace once more. Story 6. The night started like any other. I was working my usual shift as an Uber driver, gliding through the city streets, a mix of neon lights and the occasional flicker of street lamps illuminating my path. The app pinged, alerting me to a new ride request. I pulled up to the curb, glancing in the rearview mirror, where a figure was waving me down. She appeared harmless, dressed casually in jeans and a hoodie, her hair pulled back in a loose bun. As she slid into the backseat, I offered a friendly smile. "Where to?" I asked, while the car's engine hummed softly beneath us. She rattled off an address in a part of town I didn't frequent much. It was a quieter neighborhood, known more for its dilapidated buildings than vibrant nightlife. A knot of unease tightened in my stomach, but I brushed it off, reminding myself that I had completed countless rides without incident. The drive started off normal enough, with her occasionally glancing at her phone, seemingly lost in thought. I tried to make small talk, asking her about her night, but she answered with short, distracted responses. I noticed the way her fingers tapped anxiously against the seat, as if she were waiting for something or someone. The silence stretched between us, filled only by the sound of tires rolling over the asphalt. As we approached her destination, I turned onto a street that seemed increasingly desolate. Street lights flickered, casting long shadows that danced across the pavement. I felt a strange pull in my gut, an instinct that told me something wasn't right. "Are you sure this is where you want to go?" I asked, hoping to prompt her to reconsider. She nodded, her eyes fixated ahead, but the tension in the car thickened. I pulled into the mouth of a narrow alley, the darkness swallowing us as the car's headlights barely pierced through the gloom. The sudden stillness was unsettling, the kind that made every small sound feel amplified. I could feel my heart rate quickening, each beat a reminder that I was far from the safety of busy streets. My passenger sat rigidly in the back, her gaze now darting around nervously. The moment I turned off the engine, the weight of silence enveloped us. I glanced in the rearview mirror, and for the first time I saw her face clearly. There was a flicker of fear in her eyes, and I realized that perhaps she was just as anxious as I was. "Is everything okay?" I ventured, trying to break the mounting tension. She hesitated before whispering, "I just need to get out of here quickly." Before I could react, she flung the door open and stepped out into the darkness. I watched her stumble slightly before regaining her balance. Something was off. Was she running from someone? I felt a surge of concern and instinctively opened my own door to follow her. The alley was eerily quiet, and I called out, "Hey, wait. Are you sure you're all right?" She turned, her face pale under the weak glow of a distant street lamp. "Please, just drive away," she pleaded, her voice urgent. Confusion washed over me, but I could see the desperation in her eyes. Without thinking, I jumped back into the car, my mind racing with questions. Who was she running from? And why had she chosen this dark place to get out? I started the engine again, but before I could pull away, I heard footsteps echoing behind us. My heart dropped as I turned to see a figure emerging from the shadows, moving purposefully toward us. Adrenaline surged through my veins as I realized this wasn't just a random encounter. The figure looked menacing, clad in dark clothing, a hood obscuring most of their face. My instincts screamed at me to leave, but my concern for the passenger held me in place. "Get in, quickly," I shouted, desperate to help her. She hesitated for a moment, glancing back at the approaching figure, before sprinting toward the car. As she dove into the seat beside me, I hit the gas without a second thought. The tires screeched as I accelerated down the alley, glancing in the rearview mirror to see the figure stop, frustration visible in their posture. My heart raced as I navigated back onto the main road, weaving through traffic, desperate to put distance between us and that dark alley. "What was that all about?" I demanded, my voice shaky. She was breathless, her face a mix of fear and relief. "I don't know how they found me," she replied, her hands trembling. "I thought I had lost them." Her words sent a chill down my spine. This wasn't just an ordinary night, this was turning into a nightmare. We drove in silence for a while, the gravity of the situation weighing heavily between us. I felt a strange bond forming, a connection forged in shared fear. "Where do you want me to take you?" I asked, breaking the silence. "Anywhere but here," she replied, her voice steadying. I nodded, adjusting my route to the nearest safe spot, a busy diner that was open 24/7. As we drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was caught in the middle of something I didn't fully understand. The city lights flickered past us, a blur of colors that contrasted sharply with the darkness we had just escaped. I stole glances at her, worried for her safety, for my own. Who was chasing her? What had she gotten herself into? We finally reached the diner, the neon sign buzzing overhead, a beacon of safety. I pulled into the parking lot and turned to her. "You're safe now," I said, though I felt anything but sure. She gave a weak smile, tears glistening in her eyes. "Thank you," she said softly. I watched her gather her things, her hands still shaking. As she stepped out of the car, I felt a mix of relief and worry. I had just witnessed a slice of chaos that would linger in my mind long after this night was over. She turned back, giving me one last look before disappearing into the bright lights of the diner. I sat in the parking lot for a moment, processing everything that had happened, grateful that I had been able to help, but troubled by the unknown dangers lurking in the shadows of the city. Story 7. While cleaning out my late grandmother's house, I stumbled upon a locked door in the basement. It was an unassuming wooden door, weathered and splintered, tucked away behind old boxes and cobwebs. My heart raced with curiosity and dread, a potent mix that seemed to vibrate in the air around me. I had been sifting through mementos of her life, the scent of aged paper and fading perfume swirling around me, when this door caught my attention. The door was unlike anything else in the house, almost as if it were a remnant of a different time. I examined it closely, tracing the ornate brass handle that felt cold beneath my fingers. There were no signs of a keyhole. It was completely sealed off from the rest of the world, as if it were holding secrets too heavy to be revealed. My grandmother had always been a private woman, guarding her past fiercely, but this was something different, something unsettling. Days passed as I rummaged through her belongings, yet my thoughts kept returning to that locked door. I wondered what lay behind it, what stories it held. The basement was already filled with shadows, but that door seemed to draw in darkness like a magnet, making the air feel thick and suffocating. Each time I tried to concentrate on sorting through photographs and trinkets, my mind would wander back to that impenetrable barrier. Driven by an insatiable curiosity, I decided to search for a key. I combed through every drawer, every nook and cranny of the house. Each key I found was a disappointment, turning out to be for old cabinets or padlocks long forgotten. Yet the thrill of the hunt kept me going. I pictured myself unlocking the door, revealing whatever my grandmother had hidden away, perhaps a treasure or a long-buried family secret. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting eerie shadows in the dimly lit basement, I found an old tin box. It was buried beneath a stack of faded quilts, its rusty latch barely hanging on. Inside, there were yellowed letters and photographs, fragments of my grandmother's life that felt both foreign and intimate. Among the papers, I discovered a small key, tarnished but intact, that seemed to whisper promises of unlocking mysteries. With trembling hands, I rushed back to the door. The key fit perfectly into the lock, and I felt a rush of exhilaration as I turned it. The door creaked open slowly, almost as if it were protesting against being disturbed after years of silence. A heavy scent of mildew and decay wafted out, mingling with the stale air of the basement. It was dark inside, and I hesitated, a knot of anxiety forming in my stomach. Gathering my courage, I stepped over the threshold. My heart thumped loudly in my chest, echoing the rhythm of my pulse. The room was small and cramped, lined with shelves filled with dust-covered objects that seemed to have been forgotten by time. In the far corner stood a large, ornate mirror, its surface grimy but still capable of reflecting shapes, albeit distorted. I felt an inexplicable pull toward it, as if it were calling out to me. As I approached, the air grew colder, and a shiver ran down my spine. I wiped the dust from the mirror with my sleeve, revealing a reflection that made my breath catch in my throat. The mirror didn't just reflect my image, it showed flashes of a different time, scenes of my grandmother as a young woman, laughing and dancing in a world that felt vibrant and alive. Yet there was something off, a shadow that flickered just out of focus, lurking at the edges of her joy. Confusion filled me as I leaned closer, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The shadow grew more pronounced, taking on a shape that seemed to echo my grandmother's movements. Panic set in as I realized the shadow wasn't just a trick of light, it was watching me, a dark presence that felt all too familiar. I stepped back, heart racing, overwhelmed by the sensation that I was not alone in this forgotten space. In that moment, the realization hit me like a ton of bricks. This wasn't just a hidden room, it was a gateway to something deeper, something that connected the past with the present in ways I couldn't fully understand. My grandmother had kept this door locked for a reason, perhaps to protect her family from whatever lingered in that shadow. I felt a pang of guilt for disturbing the peace she had fought so hard to maintain. As I backed away from the mirror, the shadow retreated slightly, but it wasn't gone. I closed the door, sealing away whatever had been unleashed, and took a moment to catch my breath. The basement felt lighter now, but the weight of my discovery hung heavily in the air. I knew that I had to confront what I had found, to understand my grandmother's choices and the legacy she had left behind. I left the basement with a mixture of relief and dread, knowing that I had uncovered a part of my grandmother's life she had never intended to share. The locked door had opened a chasm of questions within me, a haunting reminder that some secrets, while buried, can never truly be forgotten. The echo of that shadow would stay with me, a silent companion whispering of mysteries that awaited unraveling, forever etched in my memory. Story 8. The rain pounded against the roof, creating a rhythmic backdrop that almost lulled me to sleep. But then, amidst the drumming, came a noise of faint scuttling sound from the attic. It was the kind of noise that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up and sent an icy shiver down my spine. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my heart racing, trying to convince myself it was just the wind or perhaps a loose shingle. After an hour of tossing and turning, I could no longer ignore it. My curiosity began to outweigh my fear. I slowly climbed out of bed, the wooden floor creaking under my weight, each sound echoing ominously in the stillness of the house. I grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer, its reassuring weight in my hand providing a small measure of comfort as I approached the attic door. The attic was a place I rarely visited, filled with the remnants of my family's past dusty boxes and forgotten memories. The door was heavy, the old wood protesting as I pulled it open. A gust of musty air escaped, making me recoil slightly. I steeled myself and stepped inside, shining the beam of my flashlight across the dimly lit space. Shadows danced across the walls, and I squinted, trying to discern what lay in the corners. As I moved deeper into the attic, the noise intensified, a rustling that echoed eerily in the confined space. I aimed the flashlight toward the far corner, where a pile of old furniture loomed. My heart raced as I heard the unmistakable sound of something moving, a soft thump followed by a faint whimper. I paused, the flashlight beam trembling slightly in my grip as I considered retreating back to the safety of my room. But something inside me urged me forward, a desire to confront whatever was hiding in the dark. I approached the pile of furniture, my breath quickening with every step. As I reached the base of the stack, I crouched down and moved aside a battered old trunk, revealing a shadowy figure huddled in the corner. My mind raced with possibilities, each one darker than the last. The flashlight flickered for a moment, plunging me into near darkness, and I felt a surge of panic. Just as I was about to turn back, it flickered back to life, illuminating a face pale and gaunt, eyes wide with fear. I gasped, taking a step back. The figure was a woman, her long hair disheveled and her clothes tattered, as if she had been living in the attic for days or weeks. "Please don't be afraid," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I didn't mean to scare you. I need help." The sincerity in her voice cut through my fear, but confusion took its place. Who was she? How had she gotten here? I took a deep breath, the curiosity burning stronger than the fear. "What happened? How did you end up here?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. She looked down, her fingers picking nervously at the frayed hem of her shirt. "I ran away," she said quietly, her gaze fixed on the floor. "From someone who wanted to hurt me." As her story unfolded, I felt the walls of the attic closing in, the weight of her words heavy in the air. She explained that she had found refuge in my home, seeking solace in its shadows. I could see the fear etched in her features, the haunted look in her eyes, and I knew I couldn't turn her away. But the attic felt alive with the weight of secrets, and I sensed something was deeply wrong. Suddenly, a loud creak echoed from below, startling us both. The woman's eyes widened, filled with terror. "He found me," she breathed, her voice trembling. I felt my heart drop as I realized that this was more than a simple encounter. Something dark was lurking beyond the walls of my home. My instinct screamed at me to run, but I couldn't abandon her to whatever threat was out there. "Stay here," I whispered, though I felt the weight of those words. I moved cautiously toward the attic door, glancing back at her. "I'll check downstairs." The flashlight illuminated her anxious face, and I saw a flicker of hope mixed with dread. I turned and descended the creaky stairs, every step feeling like a countdown to something I couldn't comprehend. As I reached the bottom, the house was eerily silent. I crept through the dimly lit hallway, every shadow seeming to pulse with life. I reached for the doorknob, pausing for a moment to listen. The front door was ajar, a gust of wind causing it to sway slightly. My heart raced as I stepped cautiously into the living room, my breath hitching at the sight of the door. I stepped outside, the rain now a light drizzle. The street was empty, the world beyond my home seeming distant and surreal. My mind reeled, piecing together the fragments of her story and the fear that had taken root in my chest. But before I could collect my thoughts, I heard a sound from the attic, a soft, pleading cry. I rushed back inside, heart pounding. As I reached the attic door, the weight of fear settled over me once again. I pushed it open and stepped inside, ready to confront whatever waited in the shadows. But the attic was empty now, the woman gone, leaving behind only the remnants of her presence, a forgotten memory mingled with the dust. I stood in the silence, the realization crashing over me like a wave. The bump in the night had become a haunting echo, leaving me to grapple with unanswered questions and the lingering dread of what had transpired. The attic, once a place of family history, now held a new, chilling story, one that would haunt me long after the last rain had fallen. Story 9. The hotel was bustling with the energy of travelers, each lost in their own worlds. I had checked in just a few hours prior, feeling the familiar mix of excitement and exhaustion that came with being on the road. My room was on the 3rd floor, a quiet corner with a view of the city skyline, and I had just finished unpacking when I decided to grab a bite to eat at the hotel restaurant. After a quick meal, I made my way back to the elevator, still savoring the flavors of my dinner. As I stepped out on the 3rd floor, I let my mind drift, planning my next day's itinerary. Distracted by thoughts of museums and local attractions, I turned toward what I believed was my room, my keycard already clutched tightly in my hand. With a gentle push, I opened the door, expecting to find my familiar surroundings. Instead, I was met with an unexpected sight that jolted me back to reality. The room was dimly lit, and I quickly realized that I had entered the wrong one. A couple was sitting on the bed, their faces frozen in shock as they turned to look at me, the stranger who had just intruded on their private moment. Panic surged through me as I instinctively stepped back, the door still ajar behind me. I stammered an apology, the words tumbling out before I could process the situation. The couple, visibly rattled, exchanged bewildered glances, their surprise quickly morphing into something more palpable, a mix of confusion and concern. For a brief moment, time seemed to freeze. I could feel my cheeks flush with embarrassment as I turned to leave, but something in the atmosphere kept me rooted to the spot. The woman's eyes darted between me and her partner, and I caught a glimpse of the tension that hung thick in the air. It was clear that whatever they had been discussing or doing had been interrupted, and I was an unwitting witness to their secret. As I finally regained my composure, I backed away slowly, intending to make my exit without further incident. But before I could close the door, I heard the man speak, his voice low and tense. "Wait, are you sure you're in the right place?" His tone was a strange blend of curiosity and suspicion, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. While caught off guard, I stuttered out a vague excuse, explaining that I must have misread my room number. The woman shifted uncomfortably on the bed, her expression now a mix of fear and intrigue. It struck me then that they were not just any couple. There was a depth to their connection that suggested something more profound lay beneath the surface. The room, once an innocent mistake, now felt charged with unspoken truths. As I stood there, caught between retreating and engaging, I became aware of the faint sound of a television playing in the background. The flickering images added to the surreal atmosphere, and I suddenly felt like I was intruding on a scene from a movie rather than a real-life situation. My instincts urged me to leave, yet a strange curiosity held me captive. The couple seemed to sense my hesitation, their expressions shifting from shock to a sort of reluctant acceptance. The woman finally spoke, her voice softer now. "It's okay. We're not doing anything bad." Her words hung in the air, laden with meaning, as if she were trying to reassure both me and her partner. I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on us, drawing me in even closer. I glanced at the man, whose brow was furrowed in thought. It was as if he were weighing the implications of my presence, the unexpected witness to their lives. I could almost hear the silent dialogue between them, the questions of trust, the boundaries of privacy, and the weight of unspoken decisions. In that moment, I understood that this was not just an accidental encounter. It was a glimpse into something intimate and fragile. "What were you looking for?" he asked suddenly, breaking the silence. The question caught me off guard, and I hesitated before answering. I fumbled for words, trying to explain that I was merely trying to find my own room, but I could feel the tension thickening again. The woman stood up, her movements graceful but cautious, as if she were stepping into uncharted territory. "Maybe this is a sign," she said, her voice carrying an undertone of vulnerability. "Sometimes the universe pushes us into unexpected situations for a reason." Her eyes locked onto mine, and I felt a strange connection and understanding of the unpredictability of life. I took a deep breath, finally sensing that this moment was more than just a mishap. It was a reminder of how easily our paths could intersect, how fleeting moments could carry weight and meaning. As I looked at them, I realized that everyone carries secrets, and sometimes those secrets can become tangled in the fabric of chance encounters. With a shared nod, I turned to leave, a sense of resolution washing over me. The door closed softly behind me, sealing away the mysteries of that room. As I walked down the hallway, the adrenaline of the encounter ebbed, replaced by a contemplative calm. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had witnessed something profound, an invisible thread that connected our lives, however briefly. In the tapestry of experiences that life wove, this would remain a vivid stitch, an unexpected reminder of the beauty and complexity of human connections. Story 10. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the overgrown grounds of the abandoned asylum. My friends and I had always shared a fascination for the eerie and the unexplained, and this dilapidated building was a siren call we couldn't resist. As we approached, the crumbling stone walls loomed ominously, adorned with vines that seemed to creep into the very fabric of the structure. An uneasy thrill surged through me. This was where our adventure would begin. Pushing open the rusted gate, we stepped inside, the air thick with the scent of decay. The echoes of our footsteps reverberated through the empty corridors, a reminder of the lives once lived within these walls. The peeling paint and broken windows told stories of a time long past, whispering secrets we were eager to uncover. With each step deeper into the asylum, I felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. It was as if the building itself was watching us. We gathered in a small, dusty room, illuminated by the faint glow of our flashlights. Old medical equipment lay scattered around, remnants of the asylum's grim past. A rusted gurney stood against the wall, its surface marred by time, and faded photographs of former patients lined the peeling wallpaper. We exchanged uneasy glances, the gravity of our surroundings settling over us like a heavy blanket. As we delved further into the asylum, The atmosphere grew thicker with tension. The hallways twisted like a labyrinth, and every corner seemed to hide something sinister. A low moan echoed through the halls, sending a shiver down my spine. My heart raced. Was it just the wind, or was there something more lurking in the shadows? We paused, straining our ears to listen. The sound was faint but unmistakable, a cry that seemed to come from somewhere deep within the asylum. My friends looked at each other, their faces pale, but curiosity won out over fear. We decided to follow the sound, each step feeling heavier as we ventured further into the darkness. The moans grew louder as we approached a door marked isolation room. My hand trembled as I pushed it open, revealing a chilling sight. The room was bare except for a single, cracked mirror hanging on the wall, reflecting our anxious faces. It was then that we heard it again, a voice, weak and pleading, echoing off the walls, begging for help. My stomach twisted in knots. This wasn't part of our plan. Compelled by an unexplainable force, we stepped inside. The air felt colder, as if the very spirit of the asylum had enveloped us. My friends whispered among themselves, fear palpable in their voices, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being drawn deeper into something far beyond our understanding. The voice continued, a ghostly whisper that wrapped around us like tendrils of fog. Suddenly, a loud crash reverberated from the hallway behind us. We jumped, hearts racing, as adrenaline coursed through our veins. The sound had been loud enough to shatter the stillness, and for a moment we all hesitated, torn between the urge to flee and the overwhelming desire to uncover the source of the voice. After a few tense moments, we decided to investigate the noise, our fear mingled with determination. As we stepped back into the hallway, the darkness seemed to close in around us. The air felt heavy, charged with an unnameable energy. We moved cautiously, flashlights flickering as we rounded the corner, revealing a scene that left us breathless. An old, rusted wheelchair had toppled over, the remnants of an old padded jacket draped over the floor like a fallen specter. It felt as if the asylum was alive, reacting to our presence, reminding us that we were not alone. The voice returned, more insistent this time, pulling at my heartstrings. It sounded desperate, as if the owner of the voice had been waiting for someone to listen. My friends began to back away, fear etched on their faces, but I felt a strange pull toward the sound. "We can't leave," I said, my voice shaky yet resolute. "Someone needs help." Determined to find the source, I led the way down another dark corridor, the atmosphere thickening with each step. Shadows danced along the walls, twisting and turning in ways that defied logic. As we approached the end of the hallway, the voice crescendoed, leading us to a large room filled with dust and remnants of broken furniture. In the center, a flickering light caught our attention, casting eerie shadows that seemed to writhe in place. We stepped inside, our breath hitching in our throats. The flickering light was an old lantern, its glass cracked but still glowing dimly. As we approached, the air shifted, and the voice became clearer, revealing words of sorrow and despair. It was a plea for acknowledgement, a desperate cry from the past longing to be heard. We stood frozen, overwhelmed by the weight of the moment, realizing that we were not just intruders but witnesses to a tragic story that had been silenced for far too long. As we gathered ourselves, the air grew heavy with emotion, and the lantern flickered once more before extinguishing completely, plunging us into darkness. Panic surged through me, my heart raced as I fumbled to turn on my flashlight, the beam cutting through the blackness. In that instant, we understood that we had trespassed into a realm where the echoes of the past intertwined with our reality. We had come seeking adventure, but instead, we had unearthed something far more profound, a connection to the lives that once filled this asylum, a reminder that some stories are never truly abandoned. Story 11. I took a shortcut home late at night, the roads quiet and desolate. The moon hung high in the sky, casting a silvery glow on the asphalt as I navigated the familiar turns. My mind was preoccupied with the events of the evening, replaying conversations and laughter, but as I glanced in my rearview mirror, an unsettling chill crept over me. At first, I dismissed the sensation, attributing it to fatigue. But the more I drove, the more I noticed the car behind me, a dark silhouette, too close for comfort. It had no lights on, an ominous presence blending into the night, and a knot tightened in my stomach as I tried to shake off the creeping anxiety. I accelerated slightly, hoping to put some distance between us. The headlights of my car illuminated the narrow road ahead, but the dark car followed suit, keeping pace with my every move. A sense of dread washed over me. I was no longer just driving home, but being stalked through the night. The trees lining the road loomed like silent sentinels, their branches reaching out as if trying to warn me. I took a sharp turn, my tires skidding slightly on the gravel. I glanced back again, heart pounding, and the dark figure was still there, unyielding and relentless, as if it thrived on my fear. My thoughts raced, concocting worst-case scenarios. Was it a coincidence, or was someone deliberately following me? I turned off the main road onto a less-traveled path, hoping to lose the car, but it stayed right behind me, a shadow in the dark. I felt trapped, the walls of my own mind closing in. Every twist and turn only seemed to draw it closer, like a predator stalking its prey. I contemplated calling for help, but the thought of taking my eyes off the road terrified me. Instead, I tried to focus on the navigation, mapping out potential escape routes in my head. The familiar streets that once felt safe now seemed menacing and foreboding. As I approached a fork in the road, I made a quick decision. I took the left path, leading toward a more populated area, hoping to find some solace in the presence of others. But even as I drove faster, the car behind me remained persistent, a dark omen tailing my every turn. Panic surged within me, threatening to drown out any rational thought. Suddenly, I spotted a gas station glowing in the distance, its neon lights flickering like a beacon of safety. Relief washed over me, and I pressed down on the accelerator, eager to reach the sanctuary of light and people. As I pulled into the lot, my heart raced with anticipation, hoping the stranger would think twice about following me into such a public space. I parked my car hastily, glancing back to see if the dark car would follow. It slowed at the entrance of the lot, hesitating for a moment before driving past, its presence still heavy in the air. I watched as it vanished into the night, but the sense of unease lingered. I took a deep breath, feeling the adrenaline start to ebb. Stepping out of my car, I tried to shake off the lingering dread. The gas station was bright and busy, a welcome contrast to the dark road I had just navigated. I made my way inside, allowing the warmth of the lights to wash over me, hoping to forget the shadows that had pursued me. The clerk nodded as I walked past, a small reassurance that I was safe, at least for now. I grabbed a bottle of water, my hands trembling slightly as I waited in line. My mind kept drifting back to that dark car. Who were they? What did they want? I could feel my heart still pounding in my chest, but remnants of fear clinging to me like a shadow. The cashier asked if I was okay, and I forced a smile, not wanting to reveal the turmoil inside. As I paid and stepped back outside, I scanned the parking lot. The dark car was nowhere in sight, but the unease lingered. I hurried back to my own car, glancing over my shoulder every few steps, half expecting it to reappear from the shadows. I got in, locked the doors, and took a moment to collect myself before starting the engine. Driving away from the gas station, I tried to shake off the incident. I turned the music up, hoping the familiar melodies would drown out the residual anxiety. Yet, as I made my way back onto the main road, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. My heart raced as I replayed every moment, every turn I had taken, wondering if I had truly lost my follower. The streets began to feel too empty, the world outside my window blurring into a dark tapestry. I turned off the music, listening to the sounds of my own breathing instead. The quiet was unnerving, amplifying the thrum of my heart. I glanced in the rearview mirror again, half expecting to see that dark silhouette closing in on me once more. Just as I reached a traffic light, my phone buzzed beside me, jolting me out of my thoughts. I quickly glanced down, but before I could grab it, a movement caught my eye. My breath hitched in my throat as I saw a car merging into the lane behind me, dark, unlit, unmistakably the same vehicle that had been following me earlier. The knot in my stomach tightened as I realized this was far from over. With a sense of urgency, I decided to take the long way home, hoping the familiar streets would provide me some comfort. I navigated through the winding back roads, my heart racing as I kept an eye on the rearview mirror. The dark car kept its distance, but was undeniably there, a ghost haunting my drive home. The tension in the air was palpable as I made turn after turn, but no matter how far I drove, the car remained behind me, a constant reminder of my fear. I knew I had to get home to my sanctuary, but every moment felt like a countdown to an inevitable confrontation. My mind raced with thoughts of what I might do if it came to that. As I pulled into my driveway, my pulse quickened. The dark car slowed but didn't stop. It simply turned off its engine and waited at the curb. I quickly parked and turned off my headlights, sitting still for a moment, hoping to disappear into the shadows. The weight of the night pressed heavily upon me, and I felt trapped in my own skin. Gathering my courage, I grabbed my phone, ready to call for help if needed. I took a deep breath and opened the door, stepping out into the cool night air. The dark figure in the car remained motionless, and I felt a surge of defiance rise within me. I would not let fear dictate my actions any longer. I turned to face the car, my heart pounding, and prepared to confront whatever awaited me in the dark. Story 12. The day of the accident was like any other, mundane and predictable. I was driving home from work, the sun dipping low on the horizon, casting a warm glow over the road. Suddenly, a flash of light from the rearview mirror caught my attention, and before I could react, the world spiraled into chaos. The crunch of metal, the sound of shattering glass, and then darkness enveloped me. When I finally woke up, the sterile smell of antiseptic filled my nostrils. I was in a hospital bed, surrounded by blaring machines and the soft beeping of monitors. The doctor's voice was a distant murmur as I tried to piece together what had happened. I was grateful to be alive, but puzzled by a strange sensation that tugged at the corners of my consciousness. In the days that followed, I found myself replaying the moments leading up to the crash. Then, uninvited memories began to intrude upon my mind, vivid flashes of images that felt so real yet entirely foreign. I saw dark alleyways drenched in rain, the sound of hurried footsteps echoing, and a sharp metallic taste that seemed to linger on my tongue. They were memories that did not belong to me, yet they pressed against my mind with a haunting intensity. At first, I dismissed these flashes as the remnants of a traumatic experience, mere figments of a shaken psyche. But as days turned into weeks, the memories intensified, revealing themselves with startling clarity. I could see a figure, cloaked in shadow, standing over something on the ground. The air was thick with tension, and I could feel the pulse of fear quickening in my chest. I started questioning my sanity as I realized these scenes were more than just dreams. They felt like fragments of someone else's life. Each night, the dreams came with increasing frequency, the images melding into a narrative I couldn't ignore. A woman, her face twisted in terror, flashed before me, her cries echoing in my ears. There were snippets of conversations, words of anger and despair that cut through the haze of my own life. I felt compelled to uncover the truth, to understand the source of these memories that felt so intricately woven into my being. Desperate for answers, I began to investigate. I scoured local news articles and online forums, searching for any incidents that matched the scenes I had experienced. Days turned into weeks of digging, connecting dots that seemed to lead nowhere. Each revelation felt like a ghost whispering in my ear, urging me to remember, to unveil the truth hidden beneath layers of confusion. One evening, while browsing through old news reports, I stumbled upon a story that sent chills down my spine. A woman had been reported missing a few months prior, last seen in the very area where I had experienced my accident. Her name, Sarah, echoed in my mind, a haunting resonance that felt eerily familiar. The photograph accompanying the article showed her standing in a vibrant park, her smile a stark contrast to the turmoil that had invaded my thoughts. With a growing sense of urgency, I sought to find out more about Sarah. I reached out to her friends and family, trying to piece together a timeline. They described her as vibrant and full of life, someone who wouldn't just disappear without a trace. The more I learned, the stronger the connection between us became. It was as if our lives had intersected at some point, weaving an intricate tapestry of shared experiences. As I delved deeper, the memories continued to unravel. I saw flashes of a struggle, a confrontation that led to Sarah's disappearance. In these moments, I felt the cold grip of dread, the realization that I was connected to something dark and sinister. My heart raced as I pieced together a narrative that hinted at a crime that transcended my own life. I began to question if my accident had been mere coincidence, or if it was tied to Sarah's fate. Then came the day when everything changed. A breakthrough in the case revealed that Sarah had been involved with someone dangerous, a man whose life was shrouded in secrets. I felt a surge of recognition when I saw his face, a fleeting image that flashed through my mind. It was as if a door had been opened, flooding my consciousness with the knowledge of a crime that had been buried deep. Driven by a newfound resolve, I reached out to the authorities, sharing the memories that had haunted me. The detectives listened intently, their skepticism evident, but their interest piqued. As they delved into my recollections, the pieces began to fit together. They discovered connections to a series of other crimes that painted a grim picture of a perpetrator who had evaded justice for too long. As the investigation progressed, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still entangled in a web of mystery. The memories haunted me even more, and I was left wondering if I was a mere witness or if my own life was at risk. The line between reality and memory blurred, leaving me grappling with the chilling realization that the past had a way of catching up with us, no matter how deeply we buried it. Ultimately, I had unearthed a truth that felt both liberating and terrifying. I had become a conduit for Sarah's story, an unwitting participant in a narrative that demanded to be told. The flashes of memory had led me to a resolution, a chance to bring justice to a life that had been stolen. In confronting the darkness, I found a flicker of hope, a reminder that even in the shadows, truth has a way of surfacing, and forgotten memories can lead to a path of healing. Story 13. I began receiving ominous texts from an unknown number, the kind that sent a shiver down my spine. At first they seemed innocuous, just a string of messages that felt oddly intrusive. But as the days passed, the content grew increasingly unsettling, detailing my daily routine with alarming accuracy. It was as if someone was shadowing my every move, watching from a distance and reporting back with a chilling precision. The first message arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. "I see you're at the coffee shop again, your favorite seat by the window." I had thought it was a prank at first, just a misguided joke from someone who knew me. But there was something about the way the message was crafted that made me uneasy. It wasn't just the observation, it was the implication that someone was close enough to observe me without my knowledge. By the end of that week, the messages had escalated. "You should be careful leaving the house at 7 a.m. It's a busy street." My heart raced as I read those words. Who was this person? And how did they know such specific details about my life? I started to look over my shoulder, feeling eyes on me even when I was alone. The anonymity of the texts wrapped around me like a suffocating fog, instilling a constant sense of dread. As the messages continued, they shifted from mere observations to direct threats. "I know where your children go to school." The weight of that statement hit me like a punch to the gut. Panic surged through me, tightening my throat and sending my mind spiraling. My children were my world, and the idea that someone could threaten their safety filled me with an overwhelming sense of helplessness. I considered reporting the texts to the police, but a nagging doubt held me back. What if it was just someone trying to mess with me? Would I sound paranoid or worse, make things worse for my family? Each message felt like a warning, a taunt that I couldn't ignore but also couldn't fully comprehend. I felt trapped, my thoughts racing between fear and skepticism. The next message was more specific, detailing a time and place that left me reeling. "Tomorrow at 3 p.m. you'll be at the park with your kids. Don't forget the blue swings." It was a mundane outing, a typical Saturday afternoon, yet the message made it feel sinister. I could hardly breathe, my heart pounding in my chest as I imagined unseen eyes watching our every move. I decided I would take my family somewhere else, somewhere safe. As I sat in my living room that evening, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I felt like a character in a thriller, paranoia seeping into every corner of my life. My husband noticed my unease and asked if everything was all right, but I hesitated to share the truth. How could I explain that my daily life had become a stage for someone else's twisted game? Instead, I offered a half-hearted smile, hoping he wouldn't see through my facade. The next morning, I crafted a plan. I decided to confront this unknown threat by documenting every text and keeping my phone close. If someone was indeed stalking me, I wanted to have evidence. I also made sure my husband was aware of my concern, hoping that his presence would offer some comfort. Together, we agreed to keep the kids close and to stay vigilant. By the time we reached the park, I felt a mix of anxiety and determination. My children laughed and played, blissfully unaware of the shadows that loomed over us. I kept my eyes peeled, scanning the crowd for anyone who seemed out of place. Each time my phone buzzed, my heart would jump, fearing it was another message filled with threats or taunts. As we settled down at a picnic table, the sun shining brightly overhead, I received another text. "I hope you're having fun at the park. I'm watching." My stomach dropped, a cold wave of fear crashing over me. I wanted to scream, to shout out into the open air, to demand that whoever was tormenting me show themselves. Instead, I gripped my phone tightly, biting my lip to keep from panicking. Then I heard a rustle behind me. I turned quickly, my heart racing, scanning the playground for any sign of danger. A man stood at the edge, watching us intently. I couldn't shake the feeling that it was him, the one sending the messages. His expression was unreadable, and I felt a shiver of recognition, though I couldn't pinpoint why. In that moment, I knew I had to get my family out of there. I gathered my children and ushered them towards the car, my heart pounding with urgency. The man took a step closer, and I could feel his gaze burning into my back. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking as I tried to unlock the door. Just as we were about to climb inside, my phone buzzed again. Next time, I won't be so far away. Fear clawed at my insides, the realization that this was no longer just a game. This was real, and the stakes had never been higher. We drove away in silence, the weight of the unknown pressing down on me. As we put distance between ourselves and the park, I knew I couldn't let this go. I had to take control, to fight back against the darkness that had invaded my life. I would find out who was behind those messages, no matter the cost. Story 14. The sun hung low in the sky as I took my dog Max for our usual evening stroll through the park. It was a serene spot, with children playing in the distance and the rustle of leaves providing a comforting backdrop. As we wandered down a familiar path, I suddenly heard a faint, desperate cry piercing through the pleasant sounds of the park. My heart raced, and I glanced at Max, who had perked up, his ears twitching with concern. Curiosity mingled with unease as I followed the sound, veering off the main trail into a more secluded area of the park. The cries grew louder, more frantic, sending chills down my spine. I quickened my pace, my mind racing with thoughts of what could be happening. Max seemed to sense the tension in the air, pulling ahead as we navigated through the thickening trees. As I pressed deeper into the woods, the cries morphed into a haunting melody of desperation. They echoed off the trees, creating an eerie symphony that both compelled and terrified me. I called out, hoping to pinpoint the source, but my voice felt swallowed by the shadows. My heart pounded in my chest, each thump urging me to either run back or continue forward. Finally, I emerged into a small clearing, where the cries were unmistakably coming from a deep, narrow ravine just beyond the tree line. I approached cautiously, peering over the edge to find a young woman trapped below, her ankle caught between rocks. Her face was streaked with tears and dirt, and I could see panic etched in her eyes. I called down to her, trying to project calm, but my voice trembled as I felt the weight of the situation settle in. "Help! Please, I can't get out," she cried, her voice cracking with fear. I felt a rush of adrenaline as I realized I had to do something. I scanned the area, searching for a way to reach her. There was a steep incline leading down, but it looked treacherous, covered in loose stones and overgrown weeds. Taking a deep breath, I made my way down, careful with each step as I descended into the ravine. Max stayed close, his instincts kicking in as he sensed the urgency. The young woman looked up at me with hope and fear mingled in her expression. I felt a rush of determination. I couldn't leave her there. When I reached the bottom, I crouched beside her, assessing her situation. "What happened?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She explained that she had been hiking and lost her footing while trying to find a better view of the park. Now, trapped and in pain, she couldn't move her leg without causing more injury. I looked around, desperately trying to find a solution. "I'm going to try to pull you out," I said, gauging her ankle's position. "Can you try to shift your weight to free it?" She nodded, though the fear in her eyes remained. I positioned myself carefully, gripping her shoulders and instructing her to move slowly. With a deep breath, I braced myself and began to pull. As she shifted, I felt the tension in her leg. It took all my strength, and I felt a surge of fear that we might not succeed. But with one final heave, her ankle slipped free, and I gasped in relief as she collapsed against me, her weight nearly knocking me over. "Thank you. Thank you so much," she cried, tears streaming down her face. But as I steadied her, I noticed the shadows around us shifting, an unsettling feeling creeping into my mind. The ravine, once a haven for rescue, now felt like a trap, and I couldn't shake the sense that we were being watched. "Can you stand?" I asked, trying to focus on the immediate concern. She nodded, but I could see the pain etched on her face. I helped her to her feet, and she winced as she put weight on her injured ankle. The fear in her eyes mirrored my own growing anxiety. We needed to get out of this ravine and back to safety. Just as we started to climb back up the incline, I heard a rustling sound coming from the thicket behind us. My heart raced again, the primal instinct to flee flooding my senses. "Stay close to me," I whispered, scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. The rustling grew louder, and I instinctively put myself between her and whatever lurked in the shadows. We moved slowly, carefully navigating the loose stones, but the rustling continued, drawing nearer. My mind raced with possibilities, conjuring images of wild animals or something far worse. I glanced back, and for a fleeting moment, I thought I saw a figure flitting through the trees, but I couldn't be sure. "Keep going," I urged her, my voice low but urgent. We climbed, my hands gripping the earth as I focused on getting us to safety. Just as we reached the top, the rustling burst into a cacophony, and a dark shape emerged from the trees. My heart sank as I realized it was a group of men, their expressions unreadable, stepping into the clearing with an unsettling calmness. "What do you want?" I demanded, positioning myself protectively in front of the woman. The men exchanged glances, their intentions shrouded in shadow. The young woman clutched my arm, her fear palpable. I could feel the weight of the situation pressing down, a suffocating dread threatening to overwhelm me. "Just helping our friend here," one of them replied, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I felt a surge of defiance as I faced them, unwilling to let fear dictate my actions. "We're leaving," I stated firmly, backing away slowly with the woman beside me. As we retreated, I felt the tension crackling in the air. The men watched us with unsettling interest, their smiles fading as we moved farther from the ravine. I could hear Max growling low in his throat, an instinctual response to the threat that hung around us. I urged the woman to move faster, the need to escape fueling my every step. Once we reached the safety of the main path, I turned back to glance at the men. They stood at the edge of the clearing, shadows stretching behind them, and for a brief moment, I felt the weight of their gaze on my back. I took a deep breath, relief washing over me as we stepped onto the well-worn trail, the sounds of the park enveloping us once more. We hurried toward the parking lot, the familiarity of the surroundings grounding me. "Thank you," she said, her voice shaky but filled with gratitude. I nodded, still processing the intensity of the moment. As we walked, I realized that sometimes the rescue is just the beginning of a much darker journey, one that lingers long after the danger has passed. Story 15. I stumbled upon the old house during a desperate search for affordable housing. Nestled at the end of a narrow lane, it had a certain charm, albeit worn and weathered. The paint was peeling, and the windows had a dusty, neglected look, but it felt like the kind of place that could become home with a little love. The landlord was eager to rent it out, and I soon learned why. The price was remarkably low, a fact that seemed too good to be true. On my first night, the house creaked and groaned as if it had stories to tell. I set up my belongings, feeling a mixture of excitement and apprehension. The previous tenant had left behind a few old pieces of furniture, including a rickety dining table and a faded armchair. I found myself wondering about the person who had lived here before me, but I quickly brushed aside my curiosity. After all, I was here to start fresh. As days turned into weeks, I began to settle in. I painted the walls a warm yellow and brought in plants to breathe life into the dim corners. Yet strange occurrences began to unfold around me. Objects shifted slightly when I wasn't looking, and I'd hear faint whispers at odd hours, like fragments of conversations floating through the air. Each time I tried to dismiss it as my imagination, the sense of unease crept back in. One evening, while exploring the attic, I discovered a box filled with old photographs and letters. The images were of a woman who appeared to be the previous tenant, her bright smile illuminating the faded paper. Intrigued, I sifted through the letters, which were mostly mundane notes about daily life, but one stood out. It was a frantic message written in a shaky hand, mentioning a dark presence that had been haunting her. My heart raced as I read those words, an unsettling chill washing over me. The next day, I went to the local library, hoping to find more information about the woman. As I flipped through old newspaper archives, a headline caught my eye: "Local woman mysteriously disappears." The article described her as a vibrant artist who had recently moved into my house. Friends and family expressed their concerns about her sudden absence, but no clues surfaced about her fate. I felt a strange connection to her, as if her presence lingered in the walls of my home. Determined to uncover the truth, I began talking to the neighbors. Most were hesitant, glancing nervously at the ground when I mentioned the woman. One elderly man finally broke the silence, telling me he'd seen her wandering late at night, her expression distant and troubled. "You could feel it in the air," he said, his voice low. Something wasn't right in that house. The weight of his words pressed down on me, mingling with my growing anxiety. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thoughts racing. I could hear the wind howling outside, and a sense of dread enveloped me. Just as I was about to drift off, a loud crash echoed from the kitchen, jolting me awake. Heart pounding, I crept downstairs, each creak of the floorboards sending shivers down my spine. The kitchen was dark, and the only light came from the moon filtering through the window. When I entered the room, I found the dining chairs pushed away from the table, as if someone had been sitting there just moments before. My breath caught in my throat. I glanced around, searching for a rational explanation. Suddenly, I noticed a small piece of paper on the table, hastily scrawled with the words, "Get out while you can." My pulse raced, the reality of the situation crashing over me like a wave. Unable to shake the feeling of being watched, I decided to investigate the basement, hoping to find answers. The stairs creaked ominously as I descended into the dimly lit space. I was met with an overwhelming sense of dread that clawed at my chest. In the corner, I noticed an old trunk, its hinges rusted and worn. With trembling hands, I opened it, revealing more photographs and the remnants of what appeared to be the woman's belongings. Among the items was a journal, pages yellowed and frayed. As I flipped through it, I uncovered her descent into fear and paranoia. She wrote about hearing footsteps behind her and seeing shadows that danced just beyond her line of sight. The entries became more erratic, filled with pleas for help and desperate attempts to understand what was happening. Each word deepened my unease, and I felt an invisible barrier closing in around me. Determined to leave, I climbed back up the stairs, but as I reached the top, the atmosphere shifted. The air grew thick, and the whispers returned, now louder and more insistent. Panic surged through me, urging me to escape. I grabbed my coat and dashed out the door, not stopping until I reached the safety of my car parked on the street. Sitting in the driver's seat, I took a moment to collect myself. The moonlight illuminated the house, casting eerie shadows that seemed to shift and dance. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The chilling reality of the previous tenant's fate hung heavily in the air, and I understood that I had become a part of the house's haunting legacy. With trembling hands, I turned the key in the ignition, vowing never to return. As I drove away, I couldn't help but glance in the rearview mirror. The house loomed in the distance, its dark windows like empty eyes staring into the night. The weight of the past pressed down on me, a reminder of the secrets that lingered within those walls. Some mysteries were best left undiscovered, and as the house faded from view, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. I was finally free. Story 16. The sun had just begun to dip below the horizon when I decided to take a detour from my usual route on the road trip. I had been driving for hours, the monotony of the highway stretching endlessly ahead of me. An urge to explore something new tugged at me, and I turned onto a narrow road leading to a small, seemingly forgotten town. As I drove deeper, the landscape shifted from familiar open fields to a dense thicket of trees that swallowed the fading light. The town appeared suddenly, almost like an apparition, nestled in a valley and shrouded in shadows. Its old buildings leaned precariously, their paint peeling and windows clouded with dust. A sense of eerie stillness enveloped the place, making my skin prickle with an unsettling awareness that I was very much alone. I rolled down my window, hoping to catch a hint of life or a friendly face, but the silence was overwhelming, punctuated only by the rustle of leaves in the evening breeze. I parked my car near the town square, where a dilapidated sign read the town's name, something I couldn't quite remember now. The air felt thick, as if time had stopped here, leaving the town trapped in a moment of decay. As I stepped out, the crunch of gravel beneath my feet echoed, amplifying the sense of isolation. A few townsfolk lingered on the periphery, their eyes watching me with an intensity that made my heart race. They seemed ordinary at first glance, but something in their demeanor felt off, almost predatory. One of the residents, an elderly man with a weathered face, shuffled over to me. He wore a tattered cap and his clothes were frayed, giving him a look that matched the town's dilapidation. "You lost, stranger?" he asked, his voice raspy, as if he hadn't spoken in years. I managed a polite smile, but his piercing gaze made me uneasy. I explained that I was just passing through, hoping to find a place to stretch my legs. The man nodded slowly, but his expression didn't change, as if he were weighing my words carefully. I decided to explore the town further, hoping to shake off the odd feeling gnawing at me. The main street was lined with shops that looked like they hadn't opened in decades, their windows covered in grime and cobwebs. A few more townspeople emerged, each one eyeing me with the same intensity as the first. It felt as if I had stumbled into a scene from a horror movie, where everyone was in on a secret that I was blissfully unaware of. My instinct screamed at me to leave, but curiosity kept me rooted in place. As I wandered deeper, I noticed a small diner at the far end of the street. Its neon sign flickered weakly, a beacon of hope in an otherwise darkening town. I pushed open the door, and the bell chimed softly, announcing my arrival. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with the smell of grease and a faint hint of something sweet. The decor was straight out of the 1950s, with checkered floors and red vinyl booths that had seen better days. A waitress approached, her movements slow and deliberate. She had a wide smile, but her eyes held a vacant look that sent chills down my spine. "What can I get you?" she asked, her tone cheerful yet distant. I ordered a coffee and a slice of pie, trying to maintain a semblance of normalcy while my mind raced with thoughts of escape. As I waited, I couldn't shake the feeling that the townsfolk were watching me through the diner's windows, their expressions unreadable. When my food arrived, I took a hesitant bite of the pie, but the taste was oddly bland, lacking the sweetness I expected. I glanced around, noticing that other patrons were eating in silence, their eyes glued to their plates as if they were partaking in a ritual. The atmosphere felt stifling, and I could almost feel the weight of their gazes pressing down on me. It was then that I overheard snippets of conversation that chilled me to the bone, whispers about strangers, about the importance of staying safe in their town. Deciding that I had lingered long enough, I slipped out of the diner, my heart racing. The streets were quieter now, the fading light casting long shadows that seemed to stretch toward me. I hurried back to my car, glancing over my shoulder as I walked. The townsfolk stood in clusters, their faces obscured by the dim light, watching me with a collective intensity that felt suffocating. I fumbled for my keys, the metal cold and unyielding in my trembling hand. As I drove away, I could feel the weight of their gazes on my back. The road twisted and turned, leading me away from the haunted town, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The further I got, the more the oppressive atmosphere lifted, replaced by the comforting familiarity of the open road. Yet, as I glanced in my rearview mirror one last time, I swore I could see shadows moving along the edges of the town, their forms merging with the darkness. It was a sight that would haunt me long after I had left that eerie place behind. Story 17. I was babysitting on a chilly Friday night, the kind where shadows seemed to stretch and twist in the corners of the room. The kids, Lucy and Ben, had been tucked into bed an hour earlier, their soft breathing echoing from upstairs. I settled onto the couch, surrounded by the cozy chaos of toys and scattered snacks, flipping through channels aimlessly. The house felt warm and inviting, a stark contrast to the creeping unease settling in my stomach. Just as I found a movie worth watching, my phone rang. It was the parents, and my heart raced, wondering if something was wrong. They sounded calm but serious as they asked me to check on the kids upstairs. A chill ran down my spine as I assured them everything was fine, but I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was off. After hanging up, I glanced toward the staircase, a shadowed expanse that loomed ominously at the end of the hallway. I took a deep breath and stood up, forcing my legs to move despite the heaviness in the air. The wooden steps creaked under my weight as I ascended, the sound echoing in the otherwise silent house. With each step, my mind raced with thoughts of what might be happening. Reaching the top, I paused outside Lucy and Ben's door. I could hear nothing but the hum of the house, the silence thick and suffocating. I gently pushed the door open, expecting to find them nestled in their beds, perhaps tangled in sheets or lost in dreams. Instead, the room was empty, the beds perfectly made and devoid of the warmth of sleeping bodies. My heart began to pound in my chest. I stepped into the room, scanning for any signs of movement, but everything remained eerily still. The soft glow of a nightlight illuminated the walls, casting long shadows that danced and flickered. A sense of dread wrapped around me like a heavy cloak as I called out their names, the sound of my voice swallowed by the silence. I checked the bathroom, the closet, and even under the beds, hoping to find the kids playing a prank. Each corner of the room only amplified my growing panic. I pulled out my phone, glancing at the screen to see if there were any messages from the parents. Nothing. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself as I heard a faint noise coming from the hallway. Cautiously, I stepped out of the room, straining to listen. The sound was soft, almost like giggling, but it had an unsettling quality that sent chills up my spine. I followed it down the darkened hallway, every instinct screaming at me to turn back, to leave the house and call for help. But I pressed on, driven by a mixture of fear and responsibility. As I approached the end of the hallway, I noticed the door to the attic was slightly ajar. A sliver of darkness beckoned me closer, and the giggling grew louder, echoing like a taunt. My pulse quickened, a primal fear clawing at my insides. I hesitated, torn between the duty to find the children and the instinct to flee. Pushing the door open, I was greeted by a rush of cold air and the faint smell of dust and old wood. The attic was dimly lit, filled with forgotten relics and cobwebs that draped across boxes like heavy curtains. As my eyes adjusted, I spotted Lucy and Ben at the far end, crouched together and whispering. Relief flooded over me, but it was quickly replaced by confusion. Why were they here and what were they doing? "Hey, what are you two doing up here?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. They turned to look at me, their eyes wide, but instead of responding, they broke into fits of laughter. The sound sent a shiver down my spine, something about it feeling wrong and disjointed. They seemed almost different, as if they were playing a game I wasn't a part of. "Come on, let's get back downstairs," I urged, stepping closer. As I moved, I noticed that the attic had an unsettling stillness, a silence that felt unnatural. The laughter faded, and their expressions shifted from joy to something darker, their smiles stretching too wide, almost unsettlingly. "What's wrong?" I asked, a knot forming in my stomach. Suddenly the laughter stopped, and they both turned their heads toward the corner of the attic. I followed their gaze, heart racing as I realized that a shadow was forming in the dim light. It flickered like a flame, moving independently of the children, twisting and coiling with an eerie life of its own. Panic surged through me as I felt a presence that chilled me to the bone. "Lucy, Ben, we need to go now," I said, my voice trembling. But they stood frozen, entranced by whatever they saw in that shadow. My mind raced as I grabbed their hands, pulling them away from the dark corner. As I turned to leave, the shadow lurched forward, and I felt a cold rush of air that almost knocked me off my feet. I managed to drag the kids back down the stairs, my heart pounding louder than ever. They seemed to snap out of their daze as we reached the living room, their laughter returning to a more familiar sound, but I could still feel the lingering darkness that had clung to them. I quickly called their parents, my voice shaky as I explained what had happened, desperate for them to come home. As I waited, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted in the house, that whatever had drawn the children into the attic was still watching, lingering just out of sight. When the parents finally arrived, I rushed to the door, relief washing over me. But as they stepped inside, I couldn't shake the chill that followed them, an unsettling reminder that sometimes shadows hold secrets better left undiscovered. Story 18. The highway stretched ahead, illuminated only by the pale glow of my headlights. It was late, far past the hour when most sensible people were nestled in their beds. I welcomed the solitude of the road, the gentle hum of the engine easing my mind after a long week. But as I settled into the rhythm of the drive, I noticed the car in front of me behaving oddly, jerking forward and then slamming to a halt. At first, I thought it might be a simple case of distracted driving. The driver was weaving slightly, and I imagined them fumbling with their phone or adjusting the radio. My instincts urged me to keep a safe distance, so I slowed down, allowing several car lengths between us. Yet, as I continued to watch, the brake lights flickered again, illuminating the darkness around us like a warning sign. The car surged forward, then stopped abruptly once more. I leaned forward in my seat, squinting to see what was happening. The road was empty except for us, the surrounding trees thick with shadows. I felt a chill creep down my spine as the driver seemed to be acting erratically, almost as if they were trying to communicate something. But I couldn't decipher what it was. As I contemplated my next move, my heart began to race. The car ahead lunged forward and then skidded to a halt again, its brake lights glowing red like a beacon. It struck me as unusual, more than just reckless driving. I wondered if they needed help or were simply lost, but something in the way they braked repeatedly sent a shiver through me. A knot of unease tightened in my stomach. I decided to give the car more space, changing lanes to put distance between us. But as I glanced into my rearview mirror, I noticed something disturbing. The driver had turned off their lights. The dark silhouette of the car loomed ahead, an ominous shadow against the backdrop of the moonlit road. My instincts kicked in, urging me to pull over and call for help, but something held me back: curiosity, or perhaps fear of what I might discover. Suddenly, the car swerved sharply to the left, nearly crossing into the opposite lane. My breath caught in my throat as I instinctively slammed on my brakes, watching the chaos unfold. For a moment, I considered fleeing, abandoning my curiosity for safety. But just as quickly, a strange impulse drew me closer. I had to understand what was happening. I accelerated cautiously, maintaining a safe distance but staying on their tail. With each violent stop, I felt my heart thud louder, a primal warning reverberating through me. The driver seemed to be fighting something unseen, their movements erratic and desperate. I leaned forward, peering through the windshield, searching for clues, but the darkness obscured everything but the flashing brake lights. As we continued down the deserted highway, the pattern grew more intense. The car surged forward and then came to an abrupt stop again, as if beckoning me to approach. I glanced at my phone, considering calling the police, but in that moment I felt an overwhelming compulsion to follow. Something primal called to me, a mixture of dread and fascination that drew me deeper into this disturbing encounter. Then I saw it, a flicker of movement inside the car, a shadow darting across the back seat. My pulse quickened as the driver slammed the brakes once more, and this time I could see their face, a mask of terror and desperation. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't a simple case of poor driving. The driver was clearly in distress, and whatever was in the back seat posed a threat. With my heart racing, I tried to keep my composure. I needed to do something, but fear paralyzed me for a moment. The car ahead jerked forward again, and in a flash I made a decision. I would follow them until they pulled over, or until I could find a safe way to intervene. I felt an urgency to reach out, to help in whatever way I could. The driver swerved onto an exit ramp, and I followed, heart pounding in my chest. The road twisted through a darkened industrial area, and the headlights of my car illuminated abandoned buildings and scattered debris. I wondered what had driven them here, what lay hidden in the shadows. As the car slowed, I felt an odd mix of fear and determination surge within me. Suddenly, the car came to a halt in front of a dilapidated warehouse, its facade crumbling and dark. The driver seemed to hesitate, their hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. I pulled up beside them, my own heart racing as I weighed my options. Should I get out? Should I call for help? But as I glanced toward the driver, a terrible realization swept over me. The back door of their car swung open, and a figure emerged, silhouetted against the glow of my headlights. I caught a glimpse of something sharp glinting in their hand, and my instincts screamed at me to flee. I could see the driver was terrified, their eyes wide with panic as they scrambled to escape the grasp of whatever threat had emerged from the shadows. It was a scene that turned my stomach, a nightmare unfolding in real time. I took a deep breath and mustered the courage to step out of my car. "Hey," I shouted, trying to project confidence I didn't feel. The figure paused, momentarily distracted. I knew I had to act fast. Get away from them. I yelled, adrenaline surging through my veins as I stepped closer. The figure turned, and for a split second, our eyes locked. I could see the wild look in their eyes, the fear and fury mingling in a way that made my stomach churn. But before I could react further, the driver seized the moment, throwing the door open and stumbling out. "Help me," they cried, their voice piercing the night. In that instant, everything changed. The figure lunged, but I was already moving, charging forward to intercept them. I felt a surge of determination, a primal instinct to protect. As I reached them, the world around me faded away, and all that mattered was stopping the danger before me. Story 19. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead as I stood behind the counter of the convenience store, the clock slowly ticking toward closing time. The late shift was usually uneventful, with only a few stragglers coming in for snacks or late-night essentials. I was tired, yearning for the warmth of my bed, when the door swung open, and a figure stepped inside, the bell chiming a soft welcome that felt more ominous than inviting. He was tall, with a hood pulled low over his eyes, obscuring his face in shadow. His movements were deliberate, almost cautious, as he wandered down the aisles, picking up items and tossing them into a basket without a word. My instincts tingled with unease, but I brushed it off as paranoia. After all, it was just another late-night customer, right? When he finally approached the counter, I noticed his hands trembled slightly as he set the basket down. I forced a smile, ready to ring up his purchases, which included a few snacks and a couple of energy drinks. Just as I began scanning the items, he leaned in closer, lowering his voice to a near whisper, and asked if I had any special items in stock. I was taken aback, not sure what he meant. My store was stocked with typical convenience fare chips, candy, soda, and the occasional lottery ticket. I glanced around the dimly lit store, half expecting him to pull a hidden agenda out from under his hoodie, but I played along, asking what he was looking for. He hesitated, glancing nervously at the door as if checking for eavesdroppers. Finally, he said he needed something more unique, something that could help him solve a problem. My curiosity piqued. I asked him to elaborate, thinking it might just be a prank or a bizarre request. The way he spoke, however, sent chills down my spine. "I need something that will make someone disappear," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. I chuckled nervously, thinking he was joking, but his expression remained deadpan. The atmosphere shifted, and I suddenly felt like I was standing on the edge of a precipice, staring into an abyss I didn't want to explore. As I processed his words, I realized he wasn't just some weirdo trying to make a joke. There was a desperation in his eyes, a flicker of something darker that hinted at a deeper issue. I attempted to diffuse the situation, suggesting he might want to talk to someone about his troubles instead of resorting to whatever it was he had in mind. Instead of taking my advice, he leaned in even closer, his breath hot against my skin. He explained that he was in a dire situation, trapped in a cycle of revenge and anger that had consumed him. It was as if he were sharing a dark secret that had been festering inside him for too long, and despite my better judgment, I found myself listening intently. The details spilled out like a torrent, how he had been wronged, how he couldn't let it go, and how he believed the only way to find peace was through an irreversible action. I felt a mix of sympathy and horror, unsure of how to respond. My heart raced as I considered the possibility that I was standing in front of someone truly dangerous, someone who might act on their words. He picked up a bottle of energy drink, the way he clutched it almost ferociously making me uneasy. I stammered, trying to steer the conversation back to safer ground, joking about how all he really needed was a good night's sleep. He didn't laugh, his gaze sharpened, and he slammed the drink down on the counter, rattling the register. "Don't you get it?" he shouted, startling me. "This isn't a joke. I need your help, or I'll make sure that my problem becomes your problem too." The threat hung heavy in the air, and I could feel a cold sweat forming on my brow. Panic surged through me as I struggled to keep my composure. The bell over the door jingled again as another customer entered, and for a moment, I felt a wave of relief. But it quickly dissipated when I noticed that the newcomer was just as apprehensive, glancing between us as if sensing the tension. I tried to make eye contact with him, silently pleading for help, but he seemed hesitant to get involved. The tension escalated as the strange customer grew agitated, his voice rising with each passing second. He began to pace, ranting about the injustices he faced and how the world had wronged him. I desperately searched for a way to calm him down, offering him a discount on his snacks, trying to appeal to his rational side. Nothing seemed to work. Finally, the customer, who had entered so innocently, took a step back, sensing the volatile energy in the room. I realized I had to act quickly to defuse the situation before it spiraled out of control. I reached for my phone under the counter, hoping to discreetly call for help while keeping the focus on my erratic customer. As I dialed, the man caught my movement and lunged forward, grabbing my wrist. His grip was iron, and I felt the panic rising in my throat. "You think you can call for help? You think you can escape this?" he hissed, his eyes wild with desperation. In that moment, I knew I was facing someone whose grasp on reality had slipped, and I had to tread carefully. In an instant, everything changed. The door swung open once more, and a police officer stepped inside, drawn by the commotion. The sight of the uniform seemed to break the spell that had enveloped the room. The man released my wrist, his expression shifting from rage to fear in an instant. Without a word, he turned and bolted for the door, disappearing into the night as the officer called out after him. My heart raced. the adrenaline flooding my veins, and I let out a shaky breath, feeling the weight of the evening lift ever so slightly. The officer approached me, concern etched on his face, and I quickly recounted what had happened, still in disbelief at how close I had come to a much darker fate. As the night wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly escaped a potential tragedy. I closed the store, locking the door with trembling hands, and finally allowed myself to breathe. The encounter lingered in my mind, a haunting reminder of the thin line between ordinary life and the chaos that could erupt at any moment. Story 20. The excitement in the air was palpable as I entered the escape room venue, a sleek building tucked away in the corner of a bustling street. Friends had raved about this new experience, claiming it was unlike anything else they had tried. I felt a mix of anticipation and nervousness, intrigued by the promise of puzzles and teamwork, but also a bit uneasy at the unknown that lay ahead. Little did I know, this would be a night I would never forget. As we signed in, the atmosphere shifted, becoming dense with an unsettling energy. The host, a charismatic figure dressed in dark attire, led us to the room, his voice smooth yet laced with an eerie undertone. He explained the premise. We would be trapped in a room filled with clues, needing to solve riddles to escape within an hour. His smile faded slightly as he added, "But remember, the stakes are higher than you think." My heart raced, but I brushed off the warning as theatrical flair. Once the door clicked shut behind us, a chill ran down my spine. The room was dimly lit, cluttered with strange artifacts and unsettling decorations that hinted at a darker theme. As I scanned the space, my eyes fell on a vintage clock ticking ominously in the corner, its hands moving in reverse. The sense of dread began to settle in my stomach, but I pushed it aside, focusing instead on the first puzzle laid out on an old wooden table. We gathered around, eager to begin, each of us eager to prove our wits. The first clue was simple enough, a word scramble that took mere minutes to solve. Laughter filled the room as we cheered for each other's contributions, our initial fears momentarily forgotten. However, as we solved the first riddle, the door rattled ominously, and a low, mechanical whirring noise filled the air, momentarily halting our joy. The atmosphere changed drastically as we moved to the next puzzle. This one involved a series of locked boxes that needed a combination we couldn't yet decipher. Frustration grew as time slipped away, but a sense of camaraderie pushed us forward. It wasn't until we discovered a hidden compartment beneath the floorboards that a deeper unease crept in. The compartment held disturbing photographs of previous participants, their faces twisted in fear, a stark contrast to our own excitement. With each puzzle we solved, the clues led us deeper into a narrative that felt all too real. The clues hinted at a sinister backstory involving previous contestants who had disappeared without a trace. Our laughter turned to anxious whispers, and the playful atmosphere became thick with tension. Just then, the lights flickered, and a voice echoed through hidden speakers, taunting us with dark riddles and threats that made my skin crawl. We pressed on, desperate to escape the increasingly suffocating atmosphere. The next room we entered was cold, almost sterile, with an unsettling white light illuminating everything. A wall covered in scratch marks sent shivers down my spine, each mark a silent testament to someone's desperation. The clock continued to tick down, its relentless movement matching the growing sense of urgency among us. Suddenly, one of my friends screamed, pointing at a shadow that darted across the far wall. Panic erupted, and we scrambled to find the source. It became clear that the escape room wasn't just a game anymore, it felt like a trap. As we frantically searched for a way out, the lights went out entirely, plunging us into darkness, save for the faint glow of the clock that continued to tick. When the lights returned, we found ourselves in a different room, one that felt like a nightmare made flesh. The walls were lined with eerie dolls, their eyes glinting in the dim light, staring down at us as if they were alive. The room reeked of mildew and decay, and my heart raced with the realization that we were being watched. The atmosphere was charged with fear. Each moment felt like a countdown to something horrifying. With only minutes left, we scrambled to solve the final riddle, desperation driving us forward. Each incorrect answer felt like a weight pressing down on us, and the voice returned, whispering chilling phrases that cut through our resolve. Time's running out, it taunted, sending us into a frenzy. My mind raced, thoughts jumbled, as I tried to remember every detail, every clue that had led us here. Finally, in a moment of clarity, I pieced together the last clue, a combination that unlocked a heavy door at the back of the room. With a collective breath, we pushed it open, only to find another hallway shrouded in darkness. Fear gripped me, but we had no choice. We had to move forward. The echo of our footsteps reverberated ominously as we made our way down the corridor, desperate for freedom. As we reached the end of the hallway, we found a final door. My hands shook as I turned the handle, praying it would lead us to safety. The moment it swung open, a rush of cold air hit us, and the faint sound of sirens echoed in the distance. We stumbled out into the night, gasping for breath, relief flooding over us as the reality of our escape settled in. However, as we turned back to look at the escape room, a new horror unfolded. The lights flickered ominously, and the door slammed shut with a finality that sent chills down my spine. We had escaped, yes, but at what cost? The shadows behind the windows seemed to pulse with life, and I realized that the horror we had experienced might never truly end, lingering in the recesses of our minds like a haunting specter. Story 21. It was a typical Tuesday afternoon when I received a package at my doorstep. The brown cardboard box strangely out of place among the usual mail. I glanced at the label, expecting to see my name, but instead found an unfamiliar name and address. Curiosity piqued. I debated whether to return it to the postal service or to open it and peek inside, wondering how a package could have ended up at my door. After a moment's hesitation, I decided to take a look. The box felt heavy in my hands, and the tape had been hastily sealed. As I pried it open, an unsettling mix of excitement and apprehension flooded through me. Inside, I found a stack of photographs and several small items wrapped in newspaper, each piece drawing me deeper into a mystery I hadn't anticipated. The photographs were startling. They depicted various locations around my neighborhood, some familiar, some I had never noticed before. I flipped through them, my heart racing as I recognized the local park, the cafe down the street, and even my own home from an angle I rarely saw. But it was the images of people that sent chills down my spine, faces I didn't recognize, standing in the shadows, their eyes seemingly watching me. Beneath the photographs were a few items, a torn piece of fabric, an old, rusted key, and a small notebook filled with hurried, scrawled notes. I felt a wave of unease wash over me as I scanned the pages. The writing was frantic, detailing strange occurrences in the neighborhood, unexplained noises, mysterious figures spotted at night, and unsettling encounters that seemed to escalate over time. Intrigued yet frightened, I sat on the edge of my couch, the contents of the box spread out before me. I couldn't shake the feeling that the package was a warning, a message from someone who had experienced something troubling. The notebook hinted at a dark undercurrent in my otherwise quaint neighborhood, a sinister reality lurking just beneath the surface. With every passing moment, my mind raced with questions. Who had sent this package, and why was it here? The name on the label meant nothing to me, and the thought of returning it felt increasingly insufficient. I decided I needed to investigate further, driven by a mixture of dread and determination. I grabbed my coat and stepped outside, clutching the photographs in the notebook. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows that twisted along the pavement. I made my way to the park, one of the locations featured prominently in the photos. It felt eerily quiet, the usual chatter of children replaced by an unsettling silence. As I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The trees loomed overhead, their branches casting strange shapes on the ground. I scanned the area, half expecting to see someone lurking in the shadows. Instead, it was just me and the haunting sense of isolation that accompanied my investigation. Arriving at the park, I examined the photographs again. There was a picture of a bench, taken at an odd angle. The note beside it read, "Always watch the bench. Something happens there at midnight." I shuddered, glancing at my watch. It was only late afternoon, but the thought of returning here at night filled me with trepidation. Determined to dig deeper, I decided to visit the cafe mentioned in the notes. As I walked, I felt a strange mix of anticipation and fear. What if the other patrons were aware of what was happening? Would they dismiss my concerns, or would they share my unease? The cafe was bustling, its warmth a stark contrast to the chill that had settled in my bones. I ordered a coffee, trying to appear casual while my mind raced. I struck up a conversation with the barista, carefully broaching the subject of the neighborhood. "Have you ever noticed anything strange around here?" I asked, trying to gauge her reaction. Her expression shifted slightly, a flicker of recognition crossing her face. "You mean like the disappearances?" she replied quietly, glancing around as if ensuring no one was listening. My heart sank as she continued, sharing stories of neighbors who had gone missing over the years, whispered about but never confirmed. It was a thread of darkness woven into the fabric of our community, and I had been blissfully unaware. With a sense of urgency, I shared the details from the notebook and the photographs. The barista listened intently, her eyes widening with each revelation. "You need to be careful," she warned. "Not everyone wants these secrets to come to light." The weight of her words pressed heavily on my chest, but I felt compelled to uncover the truth, even if it meant facing danger. After leaving the cafe, I returned home, the photographs and notebook still clutched in my hands. I felt a mix of anger and fear. How could I have lived here without knowing any of this? I knew I had to confront the darkness that seemed to hang over my neighborhood, and I couldn't do it alone. That night, as I sat in my living room, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every creak of the house made my heart race. I decided to reach out to others, to form a small group of concerned neighbors who might be willing to investigate together. The thought of facing whatever darkness loomed ahead alone was too much to bear. The next day, I put together a flyer detailing the strange happenings and inviting anyone interested to join me in exploring the truth. I left them at various mailboxes and community boards, feeling both anxious and hopeful. As the day turned into evening, I waited for responses, the weight of uncertainty hanging over me. Finally, as dusk settled in, a few neighbors began to trickle in, each with their own stories of unease. We gathered in my living room, surrounded by the photographs and the ominous notes. I felt a strange sense of camaraderie as we shared our experiences, voices hushed but filled with urgency. As we discussed our next steps, I realized that we were embarking on a journey together, one that would force us to confront the shadows in our community. We planned to investigate the park at midnight, just as the notebook suggested. The thrill of facing the unknown surged through me, but so did a deep-seated fear of what we might discover. That night, we stood at the park's entrance, flashlights in hand, our breaths visible in the chilly air. The trees swayed gently, the only sound breaking the silence. I glanced at my neighbors, their faces a mixture of determination and apprehension. We were united in our quest for truth, ready to uncover the dark secrets hiding in plain sight. As we made our way deeper into the park, I could feel the weight of the past pressing down upon us. Each step felt like a revelation, a push against the silence that had allowed darkness to thrive. The bench from the photograph stood ominously ahead, shrouded in shadow, and I knew we were about to face whatever truth awaited us in the night. Story 22. The journey into my ancestry began as a curious exploration of my roots. I had always been intrigued by the stories my grandparents told, weaving tales of distant lands and colorful family traditions. With the advent of online databases, I decided to delve deeper, eager to uncover the branches of my family tree. Little did I know that my quest for knowledge would unearth a dark secret, one that had been buried beneath layers of history and silence. As I clicked through digitized records, I felt a thrill of excitement. Names, dates, and places flowed before my eyes, painting a picture of my lineage that felt both familiar and foreign. My great-grandparents had immigrated from Europe in the early 1900s, seeking a better life. The names of my ancestors began to take shape, and I felt a sense of connection to those who had come before me, each story adding another layer to my identity. However, the excitement quickly turned to unease when I stumbled upon a peculiar entry in an old census record. There was a name that didn't fit a relative whose existence had never been mentioned in our family lore. The name belonged to a distant uncle, someone who had been recorded in the household yet had seemingly vanished from memory. My curiosity piqued, and I found myself drawn into a labyrinth of records that hinted at a darker chapter in my family's past. The deeper I dug, the more unsettling discoveries I made. Obituaries revealed that this uncle had died young, but the circumstances surrounding his death were shrouded in ambiguity. Some accounts spoke of an accident, while others hinted at something more sinister. The further I searched, the more I realized that this part of my family's history had been deliberately obscured, and it became clear that someone wanted to keep this secret buried. As I uncovered more documents, I began to notice patterns that suggested a troubling legacy. There were whispers of conflicts and disputes, stories of shame that seemed to ripple through generations. My research revealed that this uncle had been involved in a scandal that had rocked our family, an incident that was carefully swept under the rug. I felt a chill run down my spine as I recognized that my ancestors had chosen silence over truth, a pact to protect their own at the cost of honesty. Determined to find answers, I reached out to distant relatives, hoping to piece together the fragmented history. Some were willing to share what they knew, but others were reticent, guarded in their responses. It became evident that the family secret was not just an isolated incident. It had created a ripple effect, instilling fear and silence among those who knew the truth. With each conversation, I sensed an underlying tension, a reluctance to confront the shadows that lingered in our lineage. One day I stumbled upon a family diary that had been passed down through generations. It had been tucked away in a dusty corner of an attic, and its fragile pages whispered stories of heartache and loss. As I read, I discovered that my uncle had been implicated in a crime that had brought shame to our family. The diary detailed the struggles and turmoil faced by my ancestors as they grappled with the fallout, their attempts to shield future generations from the painful legacy. With each revelation, I felt an increasing sense of urgency. It became clear that this secret was not just a relic of the past, it had the power to shape our present and future. The weight of the hidden truth bore down on me, and I found myself wrestling with the moral implications of my discoveries. Should I confront my family with the knowledge I had unearthed, or would doing so only perpetuate the cycle of silence and shame? As I continued my research, I discovered a series of letters exchanged between my great-grandparents during the height of the scandal. They spoke of fear, despair, and a desperate hope for redemption. The letters revealed the lengths to which my family had gone to protect their reputation, even at the cost of truth. It was evident that this secret had left deep scars, shaping the very fabric of our family for generations. Finally, after weeks of relentless digging, I found a crucial piece of evidence that tied everything together. A newspaper article detailed the events surrounding my uncle's tragic demise, painting a stark picture of betrayal and violence. It was a shocking revelation that illuminated the consequences of the family's silence. I was faced with a grim reality that my ancestors had chosen to bury the truth, and their decision had left a stain on our lineage that could no longer be ignored. The weight of my findings pressed heavily upon me as I prepared to confront my family. I gathered my thoughts, wrestling with the fear of their reaction. Would they embrace the truth or push me away? I understood that revealing the family secret might shatter the fragile peace we had maintained for years. Yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that the truth deserved to be acknowledged, even if it meant navigating the storm it would inevitably unleash. When I finally sat down with my family to share what I had uncovered, the room was thick with tension. As I recounted the history, I watched their expressions shift from confusion to disbelief, and finally to sorrow. The air was heavy with unspoken words, the weight of generations pressing down on us. In that moment, I realized that my pursuit of truth had not just been about uncovering the past, it was about healing wounds that had festered for far too long. The family secret had finally been brought into the light, and while it was a painful truth, it was also a catalyst for change. We began to confront the legacy of silence that had defined us, acknowledging the struggles and hard edges that had shaped our family. As we shared stories and memories, I felt a sense of unity emerging from the darkness. Together, we took the first steps toward healing, understanding that embracing our history, no matter how painful, was essential for our future. Story 23. I attended a party at a friend's house, eager to unwind and catch up with familiar faces. The music pulsed through the air, mingling with laughter and the clinking of glasses, creating an atmosphere charged with energies. My friend's house was always lively, filled with people I had known for years, but tonight felt different. There was a strange undercurrent to the evening, a tension that seemed to hang just below the surface. As the night wore on, I found myself drifting away from the crowd, seeking a quieter space. I remembered that my friend had a basement filled with old memorabilia, so I decided to explore. The moment I descended the creaky stairs, the noise from the party faded into an echo. The dim light illuminated dust motes swirling in the air, casting an eerie glow over forgotten objects piled in the corners. I began to sift through the items, intrigued by the relics of the past. There were old photographs, yellowing with age, capturing moments that felt both distant and strangely intimate. But as I rummaged deeper, I stumbled upon a lockbox tucked away in the shadows. It was an unassuming container, yet it radiated an air of mystery that piqued my curiosity. My heart raced as I tried to recall where my friend kept the key. The temptation to break it open gnawed at me. I felt a mixture of excitement and dread. What secrets could this box hold? I glanced back towards the stairs, the muffled laughter from above reminding me of the world I had momentarily left behind. But the allure of the unknown tugged me back, and I resolved to find a way to open it. After several minutes of searching the room, I found a small screwdriver among the clutter. With a mix of trepidation and anticipation, I pried the box open, the lid creaking as it revealed its contents. Inside lay a collection of photographs, but these were unlike the others I had seen. They depicted moments that seemed to cross boundaries, images of my friends in compromising situations, some I had never known about, and others that felt like fragments of a hidden life. I felt a cold wave wash over me as I flipped through the pictures. There were snapshots from parties, but also darker moments that suggested secrets held deep beneath the surface. The weight of betrayal began to settle in my chest, and I struggled to reconcile these images with the friends I thought I knew. Each picture felt like a dagger, piercing the illusion of trust I had built over the years. As I continued to examine the photographs, I noticed something odd in one of them. A familiar face appeared in the background, someone I had considered a close friend. They were laughing, but their eyes held a shadow, a flicker of something unsettling that I couldn't quite place. The realization struck me like a bolt of lightning. If they had been part of these hidden moments, what else were they hiding? My mind raced, connecting dots that had previously seemed insignificant. I suddenly heard footsteps coming down the stairs, and panic surged through me. I quickly closed the box, trying to hide the evidence of my discovery. The last thing I wanted was to be caught prying into things that clearly didn't belong to me. My friend appeared at the bottom of the stairs, a drink in hand and a carefree smile on their face, unaware of the turmoil that had just unfolded in the dim light. "Hey, what are you doing down here?" they asked, their tone light and casual. I plastered on a smile, my heart racing as I tried to play it cool. "Just exploring," I replied, hoping my voice didn't betray my anxiety. My friend shrugged and invited me back upstairs, where the party was in full swing. I followed, but the unease settled like a stone in my stomach. Back in the living room, I couldn't shake the images from my mind. Each laugh and cheer felt tainted, colored by the secrets I now knew existed among my friends. I engaged in conversations, forcing myself to smile and participate, but my thoughts were elsewhere. How many of them were aware of the hidden truths? Did they share the same sense of betrayal I felt, or was I alone in my newfound knowledge? As the night wore on, I watched my friends interact, searching for signs of deception. Each shared joke, every shared glance felt loaded with unspoken secrets. I felt like an outsider looking in, the bonds of friendship framed before my eyes. What had once felt like a tight-knit group was now a web of potential lies, each thread pulling me further into uncertainty. The atmosphere shifted, laughter becoming more strained as I began to withdraw emotionally. I excused myself to the restroom, hoping to collect my thoughts in solitude. Standing before the mirror, I searched my reflection for answers. Who were these people I had trusted so completely? The thought of confronting anyone about the photographs felt impossible, like walking into a minefield. I returned to the party, trying to blend back into the crowd, but I felt different. A wall had formed between me and everyone else, a barrier that I couldn't quite dismantle. I glanced at the locked box in the basement, the secrets it held now weighing heavily on my conscience. Each interaction felt tainted, leaving me with a gnawing feeling of distrust. Finally, as the night began to wind down and guests started to trickle out, I made my way to the exit. My friend caught up to me, asking if I was all right. I hesitated, considering whether to reveal what I had found. Instead, I forced a smile and nodded, knowing deep down that the shadows in the basement had changed everything. I left the party, my mind racing with questions, the weight of uncertainty following me into the night. Story 24. The crackling of the campfire filled the night air, casting flickering shadows across the group gathered around it. The stars twinkled overhead, but there was an eerie stillness in the woods, as if nature itself was holding its breath. We were on a long-awaited camping trip, and as the sun dipped below the horizon, the darkness crept in, inviting tales of the macabre. I could feel the anticipation buzzing among my friends, so I decided to share a story I had heard from a local when we first arrived. Have you ever heard of the Wraith of Cedar Hollow? I began, lowering my voice to create an air of mystery. The others leaned in, their faces illuminated by the warm glow of the fire. I recounted how many years ago a hiker had vanished in those very woods, leaving behind nothing but a blood-curdling scream that echoed through the trees. Legend had it that her spirit lingered, wandering the trails at night, seeking out those who ventured too far into the forest. As I spun the tale, I could see the unease settling in around the group. I described the chilling details, the flickering lights seen in the distance, the whispers that echoed through the night, and the chilling realization that one could be followed without ever knowing. Laughter turned to hushed whispers, and I watched as my friends exchanged nervous glances. I pressed on, recounting how those who encountered the wraith would feel a cold breath on their necks before disappearing without a trace. When I finished the story, an uneasy silence enveloped us. My friends shifted in their seats, the bravado of the earlier evening fading into a tense atmosphere. I chuckled nervously, hoping to lighten the mood, but something felt off. The woods surrounding us seemed to be darker, the shadows deeper, as if they were closing in. I glanced at my watch. It was already late, and the night air had grown crisp. After a few moments, Sarah, one of my friends, broke the silence. "That's just a story, right?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. I nodded, but a shiver ran down my spine as I recalled the fear in the locals' eyes when they had told me the tale. To ease the tension, I suggested we gather more firewood, thinking that the mundane task would distract us from the growing unease. We fanned out, collecting sticks and branches, trying to shake off the heaviness that hung in the air. As I wandered deeper into the woods, the sound of my friends' laughter faded into the background, replaced by the rustling of leaves and the occasional snap of a twig. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination playing tricks, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Suddenly, I spotted something out of the corner of my eye, a flicker of light in the distance. My heart raced as I squinted into the darkness, convinced I was seeing things. Yet there it was again, a faint glow that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. It vanished as quickly as it had appeared, but the unease settled deeper in my gut. I decided to head back to the camp, feeling an inexplicable urge to stay close to my friends. When I returned, I found the group huddled closer to the fire, their faces illuminated with a mix of fear and curiosity. "Did you see that light?" I asked breathlessly. They exchanged wary looks, and it was then that Jake, the skeptic of the group, revealed something unsettling. "I heard something while you were gone," he said, his voice low. "It sounded like a woman crying. I thought it was just the wind, but it didn't sound like it." A chill crept through the group as his words hung in the air. I felt a wave of dread wash over me, recalling the details of my story the way the wraith was said to mimic the cries of lost souls. The fire crackled, but it felt insufficient against the oppressive darkness surrounding us. I tried to brush it off, but a seed of doubt had been planted, and I could sense my friend's growing anxiety. As the night wore on, we attempted to lighten the mood with games and laughter, but the feeling of dread lingered like an unwanted guest. I kept casting glances toward the edge of the woods, where shadows danced and flickered. The air felt electric, charged with an energy I couldn't explain, and I could see my friend's nervousness reflected in their eyes. Finally, we decided to call it a night. We crawled into our tents, the sounds of the forest outside mingling with our racing hearts. I lay awake, replaying the story in my mind, trying to convince myself it was just that, a story. But every creak of the tent and whisper of the wind felt like an omen, a reminder that perhaps some tales held more truth than we cared to acknowledge. In the dead of night, I was jolted awake by a strange sound of faint rustling that seemed to come from just outside my tent. My heart raced as I held my breath, listening intently. Then I heard it, a soft, sorrowful wail that echoed through the darkness, chilling me to the bone. My mind raced back to the tale I had told around the fire. Had I summoned a wraith? I mustered the courage to poke my head out of the tent, and what I saw froze me in place. A faint light flickered in the distance, illuminating a figure standing among the trees. It was a woman, her face obscured, but the outline was unmistakable. I could barely breathe as I felt the weight of the moment crashing down on me. I quickly ducked back inside, my heart pounding wildly in my chest. "Guys, wake up," I whispered urgently, shaking my friends. They groaned in confusion, still half asleep. "Something is out there. I think it's the wraith." Their eyes widened with fear as I explained what I had seen. We huddled together, hearts racing, as the wailing grew louder, merging with the sound of the wind rustling through the trees. Then, a new sound broke through the sound of footsteps, soft but unmistakable, crunching through the underbrush. Panic surged through us as we exchanged terrified glances, unsure of what to do. Should we stay hidden or make a run for it? The fear was palpable, a tangible force that gripped us. Suddenly the wailing stopped, replaced by an unsettling silence that felt even more ominous. We strained our ears, waiting for the next sound, but all we heard was the thumping of our own hearts. After what felt like an eternity, I summoned the courage to peek outside once more. The figure was gone, leaving only the lingering chill in the air. Dawn broke, casting a soft light over the campsite. The horrors of the night felt surreal, but the terror lingered in our minds. We gathered our things in silence, the weight of the experience hanging over us like a dark cloud. I couldn't shake the feeling that my story had somehow come to life, intertwining our fate with the very legend I had conjured around the fire. As we drove away, the woods receded in the rearview mirror, but the sense of dread lingered. I glanced at my friends, each lost in their thoughts, and I couldn't help but wonder if the wraith had indeed been watching us, waiting for the next story to unfold. The lines between fiction and reality blurred in that quiet moment, leaving us with a haunting reminder of the power of tales spun by the campfire. Story 25. It all started on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. I had just returned home from work, exhausted but eager to unwind in the comfort of my apartment. As I began to tidy up, something caught my eye, a tiny glint near the corner of the living room. Curious, I leaned closer and found what appeared to be a small camera, hidden behind a decorative plant. A chill ran down my spine as I realized this was not an accidental placement. Someone had deliberately positioned it there. At first, I dismissed it as a fluke, a prank perhaps. But as I inspected the rest of the apartment, my heart sank further. I found more cameras, one in the kitchen, another in the hallway, and yet another cleverly concealed behind a picture frame in my bedroom. Panic began to set in. Who would do this? What could their intentions possibly be? I felt violated, exposed, as if my private life had been turned into a spectacle for someone else's amusement. Determined to uncover the truth, I decided to remove the cameras. I carefully dismantled each one, placing them in a box and trying to suppress the whirlwind of emotions brewing inside me. The logical part of my mind screamed to call the police, but the thought of explaining the situation filled me with dread. Would they even take me seriously? I opted instead to do some digging on my own, fueled by a mixture of anger and fear. I started by checking my phone and computer for any signs of unusual activity. My accounts were secure, but that didn't ease my anxiety. Next, I began questioning my neighbors, hoping someone might have seen something suspicious. I approached a few people, but their responses were either dismissive or tinged with fear. It was clear that they were wary of any disturbances, and I couldn't help but wonder if they knew more than they let on. As night fell, I felt a growing sense of dread. I locked all the doors and turned off the lights, but sleep eluded me. Instead, I sat in the dark, listening for any sounds that might indicate I was not alone. Just when I began to convince myself I was overreacting, I heard a faint noise outside my window. My heart raced as I cautiously moved to peek through the blinds, my breath catching in my throat. In the dim light, I saw a shadowy figure lingering in the parking lot. My heart pounded louder in my chest, each beat echoing my growing fear. It was impossible to see clearly, but I could sense that the figure was watching my apartment, scanning the windows as if searching for something or someone. My instincts screamed for me to call the police, but I hesitated, uncertain of how to explain my escalating paranoia without concrete evidence. The following day, I visited a local security shop to purchase more sophisticated equipment. I needed to know if I was still being watched. The owner was helpful, providing me with tools to detect hidden cameras and other surveillance devices. Armed with this new knowledge, I returned home, determined to sweep every inch of my apartment. The process was exhausting, but after several hours of meticulous searching, I felt a flicker of relief. I found one more camera hidden in a vent, confirming that whoever had been monitoring me was thorough. But that relief was short-lived. As I settled back into my chair, my phone buzzed with a notification that made my stomach drop. A message from an unknown number read, "You should stop looking." My hands trembled as I read it, a cold sweat breaking out across my forehead. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a prank, or perhaps a coincidence. But deep down, I knew that I had crossed a line. I was no longer just a victim, I had become a target. My mind raced as I considered my next move. I needed to gather evidence, but the more I investigated, the more I felt the tightening grip of fear around my throat. Desperate for answers, I reached out to a friend who worked in cybersecurity. I explained the situation, detailing everything I had uncovered. She listened intently, her expression shifting from concern to something darker as I spoke. "You need to be careful," she said. "There are people who take these things very seriously. You might be digging into something you're not ready to handle." That warning echoed in my mind as I returned home, my sense of vulnerability growing with each passing hour. I was being watched, and whoever was behind this knew I was onto them. The following night, I decided to sleep with my phone close by, ready to call for help at the first sign of trouble. I kept the lights off and stayed silent, straining to hear any movement outside my apartment. Just past midnight, the silence shattered. I heard footsteps in the hallway, slow and deliberate. My heart raced, pounding against my ribcage as I listened intently. The footsteps paused outside my door, and I held my breath, every nerve in my body on high alert. Was it just my imagination, or had they come to confront me for my prying? In a sudden burst of bravery, I grabbed my phone and quietly crept toward the door. Peeking through the peephole, I could barely make out a figure standing there, still and silent. Panic surged within me and I quickly dialed 911, whispering my situation to the operator. The footsteps outside began to retreat, and I felt a fleeting hope that whoever it was might leave. Just as the operator assured me that help was on the way, the figure moved again, this time closer to the door. I could hear a soft, low voice muttering, "You should have left it alone." My stomach dropped, and I pressed my back against the wall, paralyzed by fear. The reality of my situation sank in. I was no longer just investigating, I was in over my head, caught in a web of danger that I had unwittingly spun. The police arrived minutes later, and as they knocked on my door, I hesitated to let them in. Would they believe my story? I finally opened up, and their presence provided a brief moment of comfort. But when we stepped outside, the hallway was empty, the shadowy figure gone without a trace. I felt a mix of relief and dread, realizing that I was still very much at risk. After the officers left, I knew I couldn't stay in my apartment. I packed a bag and decided to stay with my friend, the cybersecurity expert. As I locked the door behind me, a heavy weight settled in my chest. I might have escaped for now, but the knowledge that someone was out there, watching and waiting, would haunt me for a long time. The mystery of who had invaded my life remained unsolved, a lingering threat that left me more determined than ever to uncover the truth, even if it meant stepping into a world far darker than I had imagined. Story 26. The train rattled along the tracks, its rhythmic clatter a familiar comfort in the stillness of the night. I sat in a nearly empty car, the dim lights casting long shadows that danced across the seats. My eyes wandered outside, watching the dark landscape blur by, when I felt a prickle of awareness, the sensation that something was amiss. I turned my head slowly and found a man sitting just a few seats away, his gaze fixed on me with an unsettling intensity. He was unremarkable at first glance, wearing a worn-out jacket and the cap pulled low over his forehead, but there was something in the way he stared that sent chills down my spine. I quickly looked away, pretending to focus on my phone, but the feeling of being watched only intensified. My heart raced as I tried to shake off the anxiety, rationalizing that perhaps he was simply lost in thought, not particularly interested in me. As I scrolled through social media, I could still feel his eyes on me, a heavy weight pressing down on my chest. I stole another glance, and this time our eyes met. There was a strange flicker of recognition in his gaze, something that made my blood run cold. I felt an inexplicable urge to leave my seat, to flee the situation entirely, but I remained rooted in place, trapped between my fear and the desire to appear nonchalant. Just then, the train hit a bump, and the lights flickered ominously, plunging the car into momentary darkness. The sudden shift left me momentarily disoriented, and when the lights returned, the man had shifted closer. He was now only a few seats away, his expression unreadable, as if he had been waiting for the right moment to make his move. I could see his hand resting on the armrest, fingers tapping rhythmically, and the sense of danger was palpable. I tried to distract myself by looking out the window again, the passing scenery reduced to a series of shadowy outlines. But the sense of dread grew stronger, clawing at the edges of my mind. When I finally gathered the courage to look back, he was gone. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. I felt a sudden chill creep up my spine, and before I could react, I felt a cold hand grasp my shoulder. I jolted in my seat, my breath hitching in my throat. The hand was surprisingly delicate, yet icy against my skin. I turned slowly, dread pooling in my stomach, and found the man standing directly behind me. His face was mere inches from mine, and his breath was cold, carrying an unsettling smell of decay. My heart raced, and I struggled to find my voice, desperate to ask what he wanted or to tell him to leave me alone. Instead of speaking, he leaned in closer, his eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that made it hard to look away. There was a strange urgency in his demeanor, as if he were trying to convey something important. I could feel my pulse quickening, my instincts screaming at me to run. I could see a flicker of desperation behind his gaze, but it was overshadowed by an eerie calmness that set me on edge. In that moment, I was acutely aware of the isolation of the train car. There were no other passengers nearby, no one to come to my aid. The dim light flickered again, casting strange shadows on the walls, and I felt trapped in a surreal nightmare. My instincts kicked in, and I finally managed to push his hand away, the icy touch sending a jolt of adrenaline through my veins. "What do you want?" I finally managed to stammer, my voice barely above a whisper. He paused, his expression shifting, as if he were suddenly aware of how intimidating he appeared. I need your help," he said, his voice low and shaky. His words were disarming, but the way he spoke felt wrong, like he was rehearsing lines for a performance rather than engaging in genuine conversation. Before I could respond, he took a step back, his eyes darting around as if he were searching for something or someone. My fear morphed into confusion. I glanced around, half expecting others to join us, but the train continued to rumble through the dark. It felt as though we were suspended in a moment that stretched into eternity, the tension palpable in the air. "I'm not dangerous," he said, almost pleadingly. "I swear, but I need you to listen." I hesitated, weighing my options. The rational part of me screamed to get up and move to another car, but something in his voice struck a chord. It was as if he was lost, and perhaps there was more to his story than I could see. "Why should I trust you?" I finally asked, my voice steadier than I felt. He seemed to falter, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. "Because," he replied, "I've seen what's coming, and if you don't help me, it'll be too late." The words hung heavy in the air, and I could sense the gravity behind them, yet the fear I felt held me captive. With my heart pounding, I took a deep breath and made a choice. "All right," I said, deciding to hear him out, if only to understand the source of my terror. As he began to speak, his voice dropped to a whisper, and I leaned in closer, drawn by the urgency in his tone. The train continued its relentless journey through the night, and I braced myself for whatever came next. Story 27. While cleaning out the attic, I stumbled upon a dusty box that had clearly been forgotten over the years. Intrigued, I opened it to find a collection of old photographs, yellowed with age and tinged with nostalgia. As I sifted through the stack, one particular image caught my eye, a family portrait that sent a shiver down my spine. The faces in the photo looked strikingly similar to my own family, down to the shape of their smiles and the curl of their hair. In the photograph, the family stood in front of a quaint house, their expressions joyful and carefree. I noticed a small child at the center, beaming with a toothy grin that reminded me of my younger brother. The resemblance was uncanny, and I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that crept over me. I recognized the house in the background. It was the same one my grandparents had lived in, a place I had visited countless times during my childhood. As I examined the photo further, I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. The date scribbled in the corner revealed that the picture was taken decades ago, long before I was born. Curiosity turned into a gnawing anxiety as I recalled stories my mother had told me about a family tragedy, a child who had vanished without a trace. I had always assumed those stories were mere folklore, whispered tales meant to scare children, but now they felt all too real. I took the photograph downstairs, clutching it tightly as I sought my mother's guidance. The kitchen was bright and warm, filled with the comforting aromas of dinner cooking. As I placed the photo on the table, my mother's expression shifted from casual curiosity to one of deep concern. She studied the image, her brow furrowing as recognition washed over her face. "Where did you find this?" she asked, her voice tinged with apprehension. After I explained my discovery, she sighed heavily, her eyes misting with unspoken memories. "That's the Johnson family," she murmured, almost to herself. "They lived next door to your grandparents when I was a child. Their little girl, Emily, went missing when she was just 7 years old." My heart raced as I listened, feeling an eerie connection to the past unfolding before me. The stories of Emily had always haunted my family, a shadow that loomed over our history. Mom shared the details. She remembered how the Johnsons had searched frantically for their daughter, how the neighborhood had rallied to help, but to no avail. As the days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, the joy that had once filled their home was replaced with an unbearable silence. I could see the pain etched in her eyes as she recounted the loss, the sorrow that lingered in the air even years later. Unable to shake my fascination with the photograph, I spent the next few days delving deeper into the Johnson family story. I visited the local library, sifting through archives and newspaper clippings. Each article painted a grim picture of hope fading, of community efforts that ultimately yielded no answers. The last sighting of Emily had been reported at the nearby park, a place where I had played countless times as a child. My heart ached for the family who had lost so much, for the little girl who had vanished into thin air. As I pieced together the fragments of the past, an unsettling thought took root in my mind. The resemblance between my family and the Johnsons was more than just coincidental. It felt like a connection I couldn't fully understand. I returned home with more questions than answers, my thoughts swirling with the implications of my discovery. What if Emily was somehow intertwined with my own family's history? That night, I decided to confront my mother again. I asked her if there were any remaining connections to the Johnsons, any lingering ties that might explain the photograph. She hesitated, looking away as if searching for the right words. We lost touch after Emily disappeared, she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. But I always wondered if they found any closure. The air felt heavy as we both sat in silence, the weight of the old photograph pressing down on us. It was a reminder of a family torn apart, of a little girl whose laughter had once echoed in the neighborhood. I felt an overwhelming urge to do something, to honor Emily's memory and the pain her family had endured. But what could I do that would make a difference? Days turned into weeks as I contemplated my next steps. I gathered information about the Johnsons, piecing together their story and the community's efforts to find Emily. I created a small memorial page online, sharing the photograph alongside a brief recounting of what had happened. I hoped to raise awareness to encourage others to remember and to share any information they might have. It felt like a step toward healing, both for myself and for the family that had been lost to time. As I posted the page, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was not just connecting with Emily's memory, but also forging a link between our families. It was as if the photograph had transcended its frame, weaving our histories together in a way I had never anticipated. In the days that followed, messages began to pour in from people who remembered the Johnsons, sharing their own stories and memories. The community, it seemed, had never truly forgotten. One afternoon, while scrolling through the responses, I received a message from someone claiming to be a distant relative of the Johnsons. They wanted to meet and discuss the photograph, expressing a deep interest in reconnecting the past with the present. My heart raced with anticipation as I agreed to meet, feeling a mixture of excitement and anxiety. When we finally met, I was struck by the resemblance between us, as if the connection between our families was woven into our very features. They shared stories of Emily and her joyful spirit, bringing the little girl in the photograph to life once more. Together, we pieced together a timeline of events, honoring Emily's memory while creating a new bond that transcended tragedy. As we spoke, I felt a sense of closure slowly forming, not just for the Johnson family but for my own. The photograph had opened a door to understanding and connection, bridging a gap that had spanned decades. I realized that while the pain of loss could never fully be erased, the act of remembering could foster healing and unity. Months later, we held a small gathering in the park where Emily had last been seen, inviting friends and family to come together in remembrance. With candles lit and stories shared, we honored the little girl whose laughter had once echoed through our lives. And as I stood there, surrounded by people who understood the weight of loss and the power of connection, I felt a profound sense of peace settle within me. Emily's memory would forever be a part of our lives, binding us together in a tapestry woven with love, loss, and the enduring spirit of family. Story 28. The library was quiet, the kind of silence that wrapped around me like a thick blanket. I loved studying there, surrounded by the musty smell of old books and the soft glow of desk lamps. On this particular afternoon, I was buried deep in my notes, preparing for an upcoming exam. But the atmosphere was heavy, filled with an unshakable sense of unease that I couldn't quite place. As I turned a page in my textbook, I noticed a dusty volume on a shelf nearby. It looked out of place among the polished, newer editions. Curiosity piqued, I wandered over and pulled the book from the shelf. The cover was faded, and the title had almost worn off. Intrigued, I flipped it open and discovered it was a collection of true crime stories focused on unsolved mysteries and infamous cases from my town. The pages were yellowed with age, and the text was dense with detail. I settled into a nearby chair, my interest deepening with every turn of the page. The book detailed a series of crimes that had occurred over several decades, chronicling everything from burglaries to more sinister acts. As I read, I felt a chill settle over me, each story more disturbing than the last, as if the very walls of the library were closing in around me. Then I stumbled upon a case that made my blood run cold. It was about a murder that had taken place just a few streets away from where I lived. The details were chilling, outlining how the victim had been found and the circumstances surrounding their death. As I read the name of the victim, my heart sank. It was someone I had known well, a former classmate from high school, Sarah. Memories of Sarah flooded back. She had been bright, full of life, and always had a smile that could light up a room. I recalled our shared classes, the laughter we had exchanged, and the way she had made everyone feel welcome. The thought that her life had ended in such a violent way sent waves of disbelief through me. The book described her death in clinical terms, stripping away the warmth of who she had been and reducing her to mere words on a page. I felt a tight knot forming in my stomach as I continued to read. The text detailed the investigation that had followed, outlining the suspects and the theories that had emerged. It painted a picture of a town gripped by fear, whispers of suspicion threading through the community like a dark shadow. I could almost hear the hushed conversations, the way people must have looked over their shoulders, wondering who among them was capable of such horror. I was captivated, but it quickly turned to unease as I read about a suspect who had slipped through the cracks of the investigation, a name I recognized. Mark had been a mutual friend, someone Sarah had hung out with often. I remembered his charm, the way he could make everyone laugh, but beneath it all, there had always been something off about him. The book suggested that he had been seen near the scene of the crime around the time of Sarah's death, but the evidence had never been enough to charge him. I couldn't believe what I was reading. Mark had always seemed harmless, even likable. But as the details unfolded, I began to see the cracks in that facade. The book spoke of his erratic behavior leading up to the murder, how friends had noticed something was off, but no one had thought to act. It made me question everything I thought I knew about him. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to process the whirlwind of emotions. The library's silence felt suffocating, the air heavy with the weight of what I had uncovered. I could almost feel the ghost of Sarah lingering in the room, a reminder of the life that had been taken far too soon. I opened my eyes, glancing around the dimly lit space, half expecting to see her smiling face in the corner. Driven by a mix of sorrow and anger, I turned the pages faster, eager to find more about what had happened to her and why the investigation had stalled. The book chronicled the months that followed her death, detailing how the town had struggled to regain its sense of safety. With every paragraph, I felt a growing sense of injustice. Sarah had been more than just a victim. She had been a vibrant part of our community. Eventually, the text turned to theories surrounding the case, including rumors about Mark's possible involvement. People had speculated, piecing together fragments of memories and conversations, but no concrete evidence had ever surfaced. It was infuriating to read, knowing that while Sarah was gone, Mark continued to walk free, unburdened by the weight of guilt. As I read late into the evening, the library lights dimmed and shadows crept across the floor. I felt a sudden urge to do something, to honor Sarah's memory. I needed to talk to someone about what I had found, to bring attention to the details that had been buried. I made a mental note to contact Sarah's family, to share the information I had learned, and perhaps even confront Mark. With resolve solidifying in my chest, I packed up my things and left the library. The cool night air hit me like a rush of clarity, and I felt a renewed sense of purpose. The world outside felt different, almost surreal, as I walked to my car. I understood that I couldn't let Sarah's story fade into the background, not when there were still questions to be answered and justice to seek. As I drove home, the streetlights flickering past, I realized that I had been transformed by this discovery. The textbook had opened a door to a past I had thought was closed, revealing layers of darkness beneath the surface of my town. I was determined to uncover the truth, not just for myself but for Sarah and everyone who had been touched by her life and loss. The road ahead was uncertain, but I knew I had to follow it no matter where it led. Story 29. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows on the dusty road as I drove home from work. My mind was preoccupied with thoughts of the day's stress, but something caught my eye. An old sedan, abandoned on the side of the road, drew me in like a moth to a flame. It looked out of place, its faded paint and rusted edges standing stark against the vibrant landscape. Curiosity got the better of me and I pulled over, parking my car a few yards behind the vehicle. As I stepped out, the gravel crunched beneath my feet, echoing in the stillness of the late afternoon. I approached the car cautiously, my heart beating a little faster. The driver's door was slightly ajar, swaying gently in the breeze, as if beckoning me closer. Peering inside, I was met with an unsettling sight. The interior was disheveled, papers strewn across the seats, and the smell of stale air hung heavy. My eyes were drawn to the passenger side, where a dark stain marred the fabric, almost as if someone had spilled something there. A chill ran down my spine, but I couldn't pull myself away from the mystery unfolding before me. I leaned in further, trying to get a better look at the contents scattered throughout the car. A crumpled map lay on the dashboard, with a route marked in red ink that led to an unfamiliar area. Beside it, a half-empty bottle of water rolled around aimlessly, suggesting someone had been in a rush to leave. My gut instinct told me this wasn't just an abandoned vehicle, something was definitely amiss. A sudden noise from behind startled me, and I spun around, half expecting to see someone approaching. Just a passing jogger, oblivious to my unease, gave me a nod as they continued down the road. I turned back to the car, my heart still racing. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was intruding on something I shouldn't be. My eyes darted around the interior, searching for clues. I noticed a backpack shoved awkwardly beneath the driver's seat, and against my better judgment, I decided to pull it out. As I unzipped it, my heart raced with anticipation. Inside, I found a few personal items, a wallet, a set of keys, and a cell phone. My hands shook slightly as I rummaged through the contents. The wallet contained a driver's license, and I squinted to read the name, Jake Thompson. The picture looked familiar, but I couldn't quite place it. I dug deeper, feeling an unsettling mix of curiosity and dread. Suddenly, the phone buzzed in my hand, startling me once more. I glanced at the screen, which lit up with a series of unread messages. They were frantic texts from a number I didn't recognize, asking where Jake was and expressing growing concern. Panic set in as I read them, each message a reminder that something was very wrong. "We need to talk," one read. "It's not safe." I felt a wave of unease wash over me, and I quickly shut the phone, glancing around to make sure I was still alone. Instinct told me to call the police, but I hesitated, torn between wanting to help and fearing the implications of what I had stumbled upon. The sun was setting now, casting eerie shadows across the landscape. I looked back at the car, feeling a sense of foreboding. It was as if I had opened a door to a dark secret, one that was better left untouched. Just then, I noticed something glimmering in the backseat. I opened the door wider, squinting into the dim light. A small metal object lay there, half hidden beneath the torn fabric of the seat. I reached in, pulling out what appeared to be a small knife, its blade still glinting menacingly. My stomach dropped as the reality of the situation hit me. This wasn't just an abandoned car, it was a scene that hinted at something far more sinister. I stepped back, my heart racing. The knife felt heavy in my hand, a grim token of whatever had transpired in this vehicle. I couldn't ignore the implications. Jake Thompson was missing, and the evidence suggested something violent may have occurred here. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, but my mind raced with possibilities, each more alarming than the last. Just as I made up my mind to head back to my car and call for help, I heard a rustling sound nearby. My pulse quickened as I glanced around, scanning the area for any signs of movement. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I felt a surge of adrenaline course through me. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. In that moment of uncertainty, I decided it was best to leave. I quickly placed the knife back in the car, leaving it where I found it. I took one last look around the area, hoping to catch a glimpse of anyone approaching. My instinct screamed at me to flee, and without another thought, I dashed back to my car, my heart pounding in my chest. As I fumbled with my keys, a shadow crossed my path. I turned, breathless, and was met by a figure emerging from the tree line. It was a man, rugged and disheveled, with an intense look in his eyes. I froze, caught between the urge to drive away and the morbid curiosity to see if he was connected to the car. He approached slowly, his gaze fixed on me, and I could feel the tension in the air. "Have you seen Jake?" he asked, his voice edged with desperation. I hesitated, weighing my words carefully. "He's been missing," he continued, his eyes searching mine for answers. In that moment, I realized I had stumbled into something I wasn't prepared for, a web of secrets, fear, and perhaps even danger. I shook my head, my voice barely a whisper. "No, I just found this car." His expression darkened, and I sensed the urgency in his demeanor. "You need to leave," he said sharply, glancing nervously toward the woods. "It's not safe here." A warning hung heavy in the air, and I felt a chill crawl down my spine. I didn't need to be told twice. I scrambled into my car, heart racing, and sped away, the abandoned car and its dark secrets fading into the distance behind me. Story 30. I moved to Maplewood with dreams of a peaceful life, nestled in a cozy neighborhood where everyone knew each other. When I received an invitation to join the neighborhood watch group, it felt like the perfect opportunity to connect with my new community. The idea of keeping my surroundings safe appealed to my sense of responsibility, and I quickly agreed, imagining friendly meetings and casual patrols. Little did I know that my decision would plunge me into a web of secrets that would shatter my sense of security. The first meeting took place in the community center, a small, unassuming building that served as the heart of Maplewood. The group was surprisingly large, filled with a mix of families and older residents, all eager to share their thoughts on neighborhood safety. As the group leader spoke passionately about vigilance and community spirit, I couldn't help but feel a sense of camaraderie. However, as I listened more closely, I picked up on an undercurrent of tension, a vague unease that seemed to ripple through the room. During our initial patrols, everything felt normal. We walked the streets, chatting and exchanging pleasantries with neighbors. But the more time I spent with the group, the more I noticed peculiarities in their behavior. They would often exchange knowing glances when certain houses came into view, and whispers would die down abruptly whenever I approached. It was as if a veil had been drawn over a hidden truth, and I was the outsider trying to pierce it. One evening, while patrolling alone, I decided to investigate one of the houses that had garnered whispers during our meetings. The place looked ordinary from the outside, but something about it felt off. The curtains were drawn tightly, and the yard was overgrown, contrasting sharply with the well-kept homes surrounding it. Curiosity piqued, I crept closer, my heart racing as I glanced through a cracked window, desperate to see what lay within. What I saw sent a chill through my bones. Inside, the dimly lit room was filled with strange symbols scrawled on the walls, and an array of unsettling objects scattered about: bones, jars filled with murky liquids, and photographs that hinted at a much darker reality. I stumbled back, heart pounding as the realization hit me. This wasn't just a quirky neighbor. It was a potential danger lurking in plain sight. Panic gripped me as I wondered how I could share this discovery without sounding paranoid. The next neighborhood watch meeting felt different. There was an edge to the conversations. While we discussed routine safety measures, I couldn't shake the feeling that something deeper was at play. I hesitated to voice my concerns, unsure how to approach the topic without sounding irrational. As I glanced around the room, I noticed several members exchanging furtive glances, their expressions revealing a shared understanding that I had yet to grasp. Days turned into weeks, and I grew increasingly uneasy. My investigations led me to discover more unsettling signs among my neighbors. An elderly couple who seemed sweet and unassuming had a basement that echoed with strange sounds at night, while the seemingly friendly single father next door rarely left his house, his curtains always drawn. Each revelation sent tremors of fear coursing through me, but I felt trapped by my commitment to the watch group. I couldn't tell whether my neighbors were aware of what was happening, or if they were simply oblivious to the darkness surrounding them. Driven by a growing sense of dread, I decided to confront the group leader, a man named Harold who appeared to be the most level-headed among them. I approached him after a meeting, my voice barely above a whisper as I shared my concerns about the strange happenings in our neighborhood. His reaction was chilling. He dismissed my fears with a wave of his hand, telling me I was overreacting and that I needed to trust the community. The way he said it sent shivers down my spine, and I realized that he was more invested in maintaining appearances than in actual safety. Feeling isolated, I resolved to conduct my own investigation, gathering information quietly. I began documenting odd occurrences, noting the times I heard strange noises or witnessed suspicious behavior. I compiled a list of the houses that seemed to harbor secrets and the people who acted oddly. My journal became a source of comfort, a place to organize my thoughts, but the more I wrote, the more paranoid I felt. The sense that I was being watched grew stronger, and late night sounds made my heart race. One stormy night, I was jolted from sleep by a loud banging on my door. Groggy and terrified, I peered through the peephole, my heart in my throat. Outside stood several members of the neighborhood watch, their faces obscured by shadows, their voices hushed and urgent. I opened the door, and they rushed in, claiming they had seen something alarming near my house. As they spoke, I noticed their eyes darting around, scanning for threats that only they seemed to perceive. They explained that there had been whispers of a sleeper in the neighborhood, someone who was marked for observation. My heart raced. Had they been watching me all along? The atmosphere in my home shifted as they exchanged glances filled with unspoken messages, and I felt the weight of their scrutiny pressing down on me. It became clear that I was no longer just an observer. I had become part of their twisted game. That night, I couldn't sleep. The storm raged outside, mirroring the chaos in my mind. I sat up, clutching my journal, frantically trying to piece together the fragmented puzzle of my neighborhood. The names and addresses began to blur, and I felt trapped in a world where the line between safety and danger had vanished. I realized that my neighbors weren't just peculiar. They were part of something sinister, a web of secrets and lies that extended far beyond what I had initially imagined. The next day, I made the decision to leave Maplewood. I packed my belongings in a haze of fear and desperation, knowing I needed to escape the suffocating grip of the neighborhood watch. As I loaded my car, I glanced back at the houses, the faces of my neighbors now hauntingly familiar yet terrifying. It was a community built on deception, and I had narrowly avoided being ensnared in its dark underbelly. I drove away with a heavy heart, thankful for my escape, but forever marked by the chilling realization that safety often masks a far more dangerous truth.